Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I could see him. He was standing there watching us from the trees. It may have been a dark, tenebrific night, but I had clearly seen his face staring at us. His bright yellow eyes immediately commanded my undivided attention, when a faint whisper of ethereal moonlight unabashedly stealed its way through the branches of the trees. And for a brief second it lit up this thing's hideous face, along with its humongous-sized body. But he was there, only for a flicker of what seemed like a second, and then he was gone, as if he'd never been there at all. What the hell was that? I thought to myself, as goosebumps prickled over my flesh. I'd never seen anything so intimidating in all my life. I was wondering if this could be a trick of the light. It had to have been. I couldn't have seen what I thought I'd seen. There was no way. It just wasn't physically possible. It couldn't be. I reminded myself how on a cloudy day you can study the white fluffy clouds high up in the expansive canopy of the powder blue sky. You can see things that aren't really there. I used to love staring up at the clouds with my sister Emma on a plethora of occasions when we were kids. We would lie back on the grass and stare up unblinkingly at the sky. We would point out the blurry faces of strange animals in the cloudy vapour that stared down at us, but none of those images were remotely real. They were just the formation of cloud masses that creates this elusive imagery that dissipates as quickly as it's formed. In the very same breath, during the dark hours of the night, the suggestible, impressive, tenebrific shadows and smouldering reflectant light from the moon can make illusory, fictitious things that aren't even there appear hauntingly real. Let's not kid. Even a tree in the darkness can appear like a gigantic human being. That might be what the huge thing was, I thought. Maybe the yellow eyes had been that of an owl perched on a tree branch. Maybe I had mistaken a tree that I'd seen for being a humanoid monster. But once the moonlight had dissipated from that section of the woods, everything looked harmlessly benign, almost as if nothing had been there at all. I repetitively told myself in my head over and over again that I was being silly. Of course I hadn't seen a monster out there. The alternative didn't bear thinking about. Even if I told my friends what I believed I thought I'd seen, who were splashing around in the dark water of the lake with me, they'd think I'd lost leave of my senses. They would laugh at me, and they'd probably think I was just winding them up in order to scare them. I reminded myself that I was out here at the lake here in the Ozarks, swimming in this beautiful cool water on this camping weekend with my friends, to enjoy myself. This was the last holiday long weekend of the summer, when I would see my friends, before we went our separate ways to college the following year. Regretfully, none of us were going to the same college or university, and the thought of our great big separation looming on the horizon of our lives like a closed book that had not yet been read made me extremely sad. I wondered whether we'd drift away from our close friendships we shared together, like ships taking different voyages across the Atlantic. Would we ever cross paths again, I wondered. Of course, we'd told ourselves tirelessly we'd never ever lose touch, as best friends stayed close forever, right? We always called ourselves the Fearsome Four. We had become close as a result of sharing a dormitory together at boarding school. As a consequence, we had become like sisters. Of course, I was close with my real birth sister Emma, who was 3 years my senior. But she had left school 4 years ago, skipping 1 year because she was so bright. Some might say that the four of us were unlikely friends, but somehow our personalities seemed to complement each other. Laura Fenningrad was the tallest of us all. She was lanky and slender, with long flaxen golden blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. She inherited her blonde hair and blue eyes from her Scandinavian father. Everyone in the Fenningrad family was tall, with blonde hair and blue eyes. Laura's 2 handsome brothers were 10 years older than her, and were like blonde skyscrapers, who had young ladies chasing after them wherever they went. Laura had informed me that both of her brothers had been offered modelling contracts by an illustrious male sports magazine, but had refused them, believing that modelling menswear was a naff thing to do. Laura was a quiet and unassuming kind of person. She was more of a listener and a thinker. She rarely ever contributed much to the conversation, but she always had a warm smile on her face and enjoyed a good laugh as much as the very next person. It wasn't that she was shy or anything like that. She just wasn't the greatest communicator, but she was the sweetest, most gentle-natured person you could hope to meet, with a heart of pure gold. I know when she returned home from the school holidays, she'd volunteer at a local animal shelter and quite literally went to the ends of the earth to find homes for abandoned dogs and kittens. Suffice to say, due to her unwavering, gallantly industrial efforts, she had successfully prevented many animals from being euthanized, which was a testament to how genuinely caring she was as a person. Then there was Natalie Molden, who was always making us laugh at any given opportunity. She had always been the class clown, and was the kind of person everybody could not help but love. She didn't care a jot about what anybody thought of her, and that made her even more likeable as far as I was concerned. She was enviably confident and assured, everything I so badly wanted to be and was not. I guess back then I clandestinely hoped that hanging around Natalie Molden for long enough might enable some of her assertiveness to rub off on me, as they do say that you become like the company you keep. People by nature naturally gravitated towards Natalie, especially when they were down in the dumps or low in the spirits, because if anyone could put a smile on your face, it was Natalie. Beyond being a class clown, she was incredibly perceptive and could pick up at once if you were going through a tough time. It was probably because she had a rough time growing up as a child, which had made her extremely sensitive to people's feelings, moods, and behaviours. Ostensibly, her father was a drunk, and her mother would work all the hours God sends, returning home later in the evening, so Natalie never got much parental attention, and her father's regular temper tantrums were not healthy for the young girl. This was why I suspect Natalie's mother thought it was best that she sent Natalie to boarding school, so the teachers and matrons could supervise her every need. Natalie could read energy like no one I knew, probably because when her father was in a cranky mood due to being as drunk as a skunk, she would instinctively know when to avoid him, unless she wanted her head bitten off. So I guess from an early age she learnt to discerningly read body language, rather like a blind person could read Braille. She was good at that. One excellent example of Natalie's miraculous ability to read people happened in senior high. One of the girls in our boarding house called Letitia Thomas, who was in the class above us at school, but slept in the dormitory adjacent to ours on exactly the same floor, which she shared with 4 other girls. Letitia was certain she'd failed her exams, and was so petrified about how her parents would react to her bad grades when they received her unfavourable results, that she decided her life was no longer worth living. Natalie had therefore been on high alert when Letitia began to say things like, "My parents are going to kill me if I failed. I know they will. I know I failed. There's no way I can possibly go home. I'll never live this down. My parents will never ever forgive me." Natalie kept a keen, assertive eye on Letitia, sensing all was not well with her. One evening, as the boarders were preparing for lights out, Natalie observed that Letitia was acting weird and had become unduly withdrawn. There was a glassy-eyed look to her appearance that Natalie found oddly disturbing. Natalie discreetly followed Letitia into the ladies' bathroom. She told me later that on that occasion her whole heart was filled with a profound sense of disquiet, as she just overwhelmingly knew that Letitia was in a very bad way emotionally. Natalie had nonchalantly entered the bathroom, feigning a desire to brush her teeth at the sink, when she'd already brushed them 15 minutes before. In truth, she was clandestinely watching Letitia's every move through the bathroom mirror. Natalie observed Letitia pulling out a sharp blade from her wash bag. This was a blade capable of doing a great deal of damage. It was clear that Letitia had smuggled this blade into school, and you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to guess what the blade was going to be used for, especially given Letitia's current emotional state, that had recently been as fragile as fine china. For a brief second, Natalie turned around to look at Letitia. Her discerning eyes met Letitia, who at that time was concealing the blade behind her back. For a second Natalie said nothing, but her horrified expression seemed to speak 1,000 words. And then she said, "You can't do it, Letitia. I know you're hiding a blade behind your back. Please give it to me. You don't want to do this. I'm begging you, Letitia, don't do this." She tried in haste to grab the blade from Letitia, but it was no use. Letitia managed to get away. She ran into the toilet cubicle as quickly as she could, slamming the door behind her with a mighty bang. Natalie was pounding on the cubicle door and begging Letitia to open up. She was crying after her, "Letitia, please don't! I'm begging you, please don't do this! You're crazy! You mustn't do this! Let's talk about this! Nothing can be that bad! I'm sure your parents will forgive you if your exams didn't go well. I promise you it's not the end of the world. You've got so much to live for. Letitia, I'm begging you. Don't do this." "Go away, will you, Natalie?" Letitia cried out indignantly. "You don't have a clue what you're talking about. My parents will kill me if I failed my exam. And I've failed, I know I have. I cannot live with this pressure on me anymore. It's too much. I just can't cope. I think I'm going to explode. I have to do this. You have no way of knowing what it's like to be me. Just go back to the dormitory, please. Pretend you never saw me. I have to do this. Please let me do this. I'm not going to let you do this, Letitia. Are you mad? I'm not going to let you do this," Natalie cried out, banging furiously on the door and demanding Letitia to let her in. "Please let me in, Letitia. Let me in. Don't do this. I'm begging you." In seconds, Letitia, it would seem, wasted no time in hurriedly slashing her wrists, lest Natalie would succeed in stopping her from achieving her goal. As I suspect, she realized that Natalie imposed a threat to her plan. Letitia wanted out and was absolutely determined to kill herself, and nobody was going to stop her. But it would seem Letitia had underestimated how determined Natalie was to save her. Natalie broke down the store door by giving it some powerfully hard kicks. It burst open. She found Letitia sitting there on the toilet seat, wrists badly slashed. Blood was sprinkled absolutely everywhere, like red paint on a white contemporary artist's canvas. It was on the toilet floor, on the walls of the store. It looked grotesquely sinister, like something out of a macabre horror movie, or your very worst, most treacherous and terrifying nightmare that you would never wish to entertain in real life. It was enough to make you want to pass out on the spot from the grim reality of such a dreadful scene. But Natalie held it together. She knew if she didn't stop the bleeding at once, Letitia would surely die. She was losing blood quickly from the very deep cuts to her wrist, and growing weak very fast. She flopped over the toilet seat like a rag doll, her face white and waxy, her body growing cold. Natalie managed to rip off her pajama top in record time. She tore it into strips, carefully binding the material over Letitia's wrists to stem the blood flow. She wasted no time in notifying the matron, Miss Greenwich, who was on duty, and Miss Greenwich thankfully called the emergency services. At this point, Letitia was thankfully too weak to put up any fight or any resistance, so to speak. She had lost far too much blood. There was no fight left in her, and her energy was draining away like the last remaining water in a bathtub. The matron, Miss Greenwich, was mortified to see what Letitia had done to herself, and all she could say was, "Why, Letitia? Why would you do this to yourself, love? I don't understand. You've got so much to live for." Letitia whimpered, "No, I don't. I failed my exams." Natalie managed to make jokes in this very sombre, gloomy moment, which was so typical of her. She even tried to keep Letitia alert. And against all the odds, Letitia did manage a half-hearted smile before she finally pegged out and was taken away in the ambulance to receive immediate medical attention in order to save her life. There is no doubt the emergency services were extremely impressed with Natalie's courage, and I think no one at school was in any doubt that Natalie had definitely saved Letitia's life. So everybody unequivocally believed not only was she the class clown, but also a hero. She was the kind of person you would definitely choose to be with you if you were stranded on a desert island. She was resilient, headstrong and determined, and could keep things together in difficult, tumultuous times. And most of all, she could boost your morale. Luckily, Letitia made a full recovery, and Letitia's parents thought that Natalie was a hero. Indeed, Letitia's parents were so very grateful to her, they actually brought Natalie a white BMW, which she'd be able to drive once she got her driver's license. But Natalie was thrilled with the gift. I mean, who wouldn't be? Letitia's parents were thankfully never hard on their daughter again about her exam results, as they quickly realized that putting undue pressure on their daughter was counterproductive and had nearly cost them her life. The irony of ironies is Letitia never failed the exam she thought she had failed. She had been so worried about it. On the contrary, it appeared that she got reasonably good grades, so she would have taken her life for no reason at all. There was no doubt that Natalie saved Letitia's life, so she wasn't only funny, she was intuitive, and who wouldn't want a friend like that watching your back? Then, of course, there was Claudia Salazar, who, much like Natalie, didn't come from a good family. It would seem both her parents were big drug users, and so Claudia was sent to live with her mother's sister, a woman she called Aunt Eva. I was to learn that Aunt Eva was unmarried and worked exclusively full-time at 2 jobs in order to give Claudia a good quality of life, so Claudia would want for nothing. So that woman was an absolute Trojan. It was the demands of her full-time job that had meant that Aunt Eva had promptly decided that it was for the best thing to send Claudia to boarding school, as she couldn't be there for her niece full-time. I guess she was rather worried that if Claudia were unsupervised, she could get herself into all kinds of trouble. Claudia was very close to Aunt Eva and considered her to be the maternal figure in her life. She barely ever knew her own parents, as she had lived with Aunt Eva since she was a toddler, when social services had given Eva full custody of her niece. Claudia's parents had never once expressed any interest in their daughter, as all they cared about was their next fix. So in fact her life story was quite a tragic one. One day at boarding school, Claudia was informed by the headmistress that her mother had died of a drug overdose, and that her father was so desperately sick he was now living on borrowed time, as his liver had completely packed up due to bad cirrhosis. When Claudia learnt the devastating, rather lamentable news, she barely batted an eyelid, claiming very matter-of-factly that her parents had never been there for her, and she'd barely known them. The truth is she never shed so much as a tear for them, because they meant so little to her. Claudia was without question the brightest out of the 4 of us. She was the type of person that annoyingly got straight A's in everything, without even really trying to apply herself. But despite her obvious brilliance, there was a mischievous, rebellious side to her character, which meant she was eager to bend the rules at any given opportunity, and often actively encouraged it. There were many occasions she had persuaded the fearsome 4 to sneak into the main kitchen at the school and raid the pantry there. We'd find a half-open window and would crawl right through it, where we would land on the countertop, and then we would sneakily make our way to the pantry, which was a treasure trove of delicious opportunities waiting to be devoured by hungry boarders. If you've ever been a boarder, you will fully understand the importance of food, and when we raided that pantry, we would return back to the dormitory with the enticing, wicked, decadent fruits of our sneaky labours, which would include tins of condensed milk, packets of marshmallows, cookies, peanut butter, and sometimes even doughnuts or apple crumble bars, which were the very best, And when we found those, it felt like we'd died and gone to heaven, quite literally. So many times during the summer terms of the dead of night, we would slip out of the school dormitory and quickly make our way down the staircase, over the locked railed fence, which we would climb over, and trek all the way to the school swimming pool that was tucked at the far end of the school building, in a private sequestered space opposite the school changing rooms that were always locked at night. It was here, under the still canopy of darkness, with the sky bursting with a treasure trove of bling, against the pretty trillful chorus of crickets and frogs, we would thoroughly enjoy a sneaky dip in the swimming pool. I think we did it for the thrill rather than for anything else, and it's amazing that we never got caught, although on one occasion we very nearly did, when the matron, Miss Greenwich, a stout, no-nonsense, lovable character in her early 60s, very nearly tripped over a sopping wet swimming costume lying in the middle of our dormitory floor, that Natalie had disregarded and forgotten to put away. She could be a tad sloppy like that. She'd be the kind of burglar that broke into your house and left her calling card behind, detailing her name and address for you. That kind of burglar. Miss Greenwich had looked down at the swimming costume, with a perplexed, rather confounded look on her heavily powdered face, and said, "What on earth is a swimming costume doing here, in the middle of the floor like this?" We never kept our swimming costumes in our dormitories, with the exception of the fearsome four, of course, who discreetly hid their swimming costumes and towels in their closets in order to enjoy the occasional secret midnight swim. It was Natalie's swimming costume, and thankfully the matron, Miss Greenwich, had a soft spot for her. Natalie could do no wrong in Miss Greenwich's eyes. Natalie gave Miss Greenwich a charming smile, capable of melting the hardest of hearts. Natalie made a puzzled face, as if she found the conundrum of her wet swimming costume lying in the middle of the dormitory floor equally as bewildering as the matron did. "That is so weird, Miss Greenwich, it really is," she said, exaggerating how puzzled she was about this. "I can't understand, for the life of me, why my swimming costume is sopping wet in the first place, and what it's doing here on the dormitory floor of all things, when it should be in the changing room by the swimming pool. How did it get here? I can't imagine. Someone must be playing a joke on me, Miss Greenwich. But I'm not laughing, are you? I mean, you nearly slipped over this thing," she said, bending over to retrieve the offending item. "Well, if this is somebody's idea of a joke, much like you, Natalie, I fail to find it amusing. Especially since I very nearly lost my footing. I could have badly twisted my ankle, you know, if I didn't happen to have such excellent deportment. See to it, Natalie, that from now on you always leave your swimming costume in the changing room. Don't bring your swimming costume into the boarding house. Is that understood?" "Yes, perfectly, Miss Greenwich," Natalie had said. And that had been that. Whether Miss Greenwich knew what the four of us were really getting up to, I do not know. I suspect the sopping wet swimming costume was a dead giveaway that probably left Miss Greenwich in no uncertain doubt that the four of us were getting up to all kinds of mischief behind her back. Then there was me, little old me. I don't really know how I would actually describe myself. I'm pretty ordinary, really. Nothing special to write home about. Back in those days, I had unremarkable, straight brown bobbed hair, cinnamon-coloured eyes, and a skinny body that never gained any weight in those early years, no matter how much stodge I consumed, of which there was an awful lot at boarding school. Much like my friends, I thoroughly enjoyed having fun, and was very happy to stretch the boundaries when it came to the school rules, because as far as I was concerned, rules were meant to be broken. I enjoyed being controversial, and was a keen and eager debater. I was very good at getting people to see things from a completely different perspective. I'm glad that our school positively encouraged different opinions on things. We were motivated to think outside of the box. Let's say our teachers did not ram down any progressive ideologies down our throats, as is often seen in universities and schools today, which is very sad, as people should learn to develop their own opinions on things and not be influenced so easily by others. So yes, the four of us got on famously, but I had a sinking feeling that this may be the last time we would enjoy ourselves together here in the Ozarks. The following year was not very far away, and by then we would very sadly part ways, when we were ferried away to different colleges or universities to begin a new uncharted journey in our lives. Knowing all this invariably made me feel so very down in the dumps, But I didn't allow such negative emotions to spoil the good time that lay stretched out before us on this camping trip, like a pirate's treasure map waiting to be explored. The truth was, I only had to have a look at my mother's life to have full confirmation of the fears I harnessed. My mother had two best friends when she was at school, Cynthia Logan and Carla Jennings, and after my mother went to university, they parted ways and never ever saw each other again. They swore they would keep faithfully in touch, but they never did. It's amazing how your everyday life can take over, and the past that you leave behind soon gets quickly forgotten about, like a holiday you went on years ago, and when you look back on that vacation, your memory can be ambiguously vague at the very best of times. My mother connected with Carla on Facebook once, but she realized she had nothing in common with her old friend anymore, and so the friendship fell apart before it even had an opportunity to be renewed. It would appear that Carla had changed in leaps and bounds, and was barely recognizable to my mother as her old friend. The woman had married a woman, and had subsequently adopted 3 children from China. She had become a car mechanic, and could only talk about engines. My mother had about as much interest in car engines as a ballerina would have in wearing a pair of combat boots during a ballet audition, so they now had nothing in common. Then when it came to my mother's other good friend, Cynthia, she was unable to locate the woman's whereabouts, for she did not know the married name of Cynthia, and gathered that the woman had moved to Australia, and she had no way of knowing whether this was true or not. My mother warned me that this could happen to me, and that my friendships from the past with the fearsome fool might fall apart when our lives took on different paths. "I'm afraid, sweetheart, it's the way of the world," she told me in no uncertain terms. "Your friends are all going to go to different colleges or universities. I hate to say this, love, but it's likely you will lose touch with them. Even if you do remain in touch, at some stage you might find you have nothing in common. When I found out that Carla had married a woman and was a car mechanic, I couldn't believe it. She had been nothing like that when I was at school. She'd always been what I would have thought was a girly girl, and now she looks like she's become a strapping woman. So you have to prepare yourself that people can change dramatically. When I look at Carla's picture today, with her short cropped hair and tattoos, I barely recognize the pretty girl I used to hang around with at school. People change, love. It's a scary truth you may have to one day fully entertain." "That's not going to happen to the fearsome fool," I said insistently. But as defensive as I was, I knew deep down in my gut that my mother was right. "Look, love, I do hope for your sake the fearsome four stay the very best of friends forever and ever. And maybe you will. Stranger things have happened. But somehow I doubt it, based on my own experiences of the past. Maybe I just drew the short straw. I don't know. For your sake, I hope I'm proved wrong about this." "I hope you are wrong, Mum. I'd loathe to lose touch with the fearsome four. I couldn't imagine anything worse. I don't think I'll ever find friends as good as these. I just wish we weren't all going to different colleges and universities so far apart. It's such a dreadful bummer. The lake was so beautiful that night at the Ozarks. I loved being in this prepossessing part of the world that I'd always dreamed and longed to visit. And now I was finally here with my 3 best friends, swimming in this mesmerizing body of water. The moon magnanimously cast her silvery prisms of light across its surface. We weren't supposed to be out here swimming in the lake, but doing something forbidden was all the more exciting for us. We had been told very strictly by Mrs. Cooper and Matron Greenwich that no one under any circumstances must leave their tents during the night on this camping trip, unless they needed to answer a call of nature. If they needed anything else during the night, they were required to go straight to the adult's tent. I was very glad that Miss Greenwich, the school matron, was on this trip with us and supervising everything, as she was by nature an efficient, orderly woman. Miss Greenwich had never been married, was quite a buxom woman with pillowy breasts that many a young girl had cried into when they'd received sad news from home. Miss Greenwich always smelt of powder and lavender body wash. She had such a good heart on her, and at the same time a no-nonsense disposition. I think over the years, like many of the boarders in our school, I had grown extremely fond of the woman, for she fulfilled the quintessential role of being the maternal figure in our lives, offering us support and encouragement when our parents could not be there for us. Miss Greenwich, like the vast majority of the girls in my year, had never ever been to the Ozarks before, so she was extremely excited about supervising this trip for us, and especially for those of us in our final year. So in a manner of speaking, the trip was a celebration of the years we'd spent in the boarding house together. There were 28 pupils on this camping trip at the Ozarks. Some of the students were day scholars, but most boarders. Everyone was assigned to a tent that held 4 campers, so naturally I was sharing a 4-man tent with my 3 very best friends, or should I say more appropriately, the fearsome 4. We'd been looking extremely forward to this trip to the Ozarks, for even before it had been planned, I myself had been speaking about it longingly since the very beginning of the year, like you do when you're hungrily counting the days until you go on that special holiday. This trip to the Ozarks, in my opinion, was particularly celebratory, because all the boarders in my year were like extended members of my family. We'd practically grown up together. Hopefully we would never ever forget this long weekend, and look back on it with much fondness. Little did I realize that this was a trip that none of the fearsome 4 would ever be able to forget, and it would stay under our skin indelibly for years to come, like a thorn in the side. The tents were pitched close together, under the vast canopy of the trees, overlooking beguiling, prepossessing views of the silvery lake. It really was magnificently beautiful. I know beautiful these days is a word that can so often be overused, but honestly there are no other words to credit the lake and her scenic surroundings more eloquently. In the furthest distance you could see the signature of the awe-inspiring plateaus, rolling hills and karst formations, known to some people as the Ozark Mountains, that proudly confiscated the skyline with their dignified resplendence. The lake, under a shimmering golden glaze of the setting sun on our first evening at the Ozarks, was one of the most exquisite and beguiling things I have ever yet beheld, and I don't say that very lightly. But right now the dark water mirrored the entire Milky Way on its surface, so it felt as if we were quite literally swimming in a sea of glittery stars, so much better than the rather nondescript swimming pool back at school. The White Oak Sanctuary was the name of the place where we were camping. It, I believe, was owned by a man called Philip Donovan, who was a bird lover. The vast property was well known for its incredible selection of rare birds. It was at about 9 o'clock in the morning that we finally pitched up our tents under the trees on a slight hilly incline that overlooked the shimmering lake. There were 28 of us that had gone off on an intrepid, rather venturesome trail through the trees, with binoculars casually slung over our shoulders, for we were eager to spot any interesting bird life, and hoped we might be lucky enough to spot something rare. We were sensibly attired, wearing walking boots, shorts and t-shirts. It was quite a hot day, and there were lots of midges flying around, threatening to bite us. In the morning we trekked through the tall lofty trees, alongside vast tumbles of indigenous foliage, where we sashayed down undulating pathways dappled with rocks and fallen leaf litter. The shade the trees generously invited kept us feeling cool and refreshed. The invigorating walk had been extremely pleasant, and we'd all worked up quite a sweat, and in the process succeeded in scaring off some displeased wild turkey, some grouse, some white-tailed deer, and several rabbits, who did not look best enamoured to see these impertinent intruders wantonly stealing away their peace. We returned to base camp at lunchtime, feeling both famished and physically exhausted, eager to enjoy a pleasant barbecue. Miss Greenwich and Mrs. Cooper, who was our English teacher at the time, industriously got to work preparing for us a sumptuously delicious selection of hot dogs and hamburgers, served with a temptingly irresistible range of relishes that Miss Greenwich herself had insisted on bringing along as extra condiments. She was a woman who thoroughly enjoyed her food, and would consider it a cardinal sin to eat a burger without all the relishes. We had thoroughly enjoyed a fishing excursion at the lake that afternoon, and following that had welcomed in the evening by taking some leisurely boat rides across the water, which had been exhilarating, and had easily enabled us to work up whopping appetites for the evening al fresco meal. I don't think there was even one among us that wasn't absolutely delighted to be here, but all the extra physical exertion had cost us dearly, making our muscles ache so that our young, tired bodies felt well and truly spent. I hasten to say one of the girls in my year, called Gillian Glover, had been fishing since she was knee-high to a grasshopper. She had successfully, very impressively, managed to catch over 6 enormous fish that afternoon, seemingly so effortlessly, as if it was no big deal, which left me feeling slightly bereft. I had always thought anyone could fish. You just cast out your rod into the water, and bingo, you hit pay dirt when something chose to bite the fly on the end of the line. I learnt the hard way that there really is a remarkable skill in being a good fisherman. It requires a steady, firm hand, a keen eye as to where to cast your rod, along with a hell of a lot of patience, which I hasten to say I am sorely lacking in. I'm embarrassed to have to admit that I pulled in no fish that afternoon, and felt rather peeved by my lack of good fortune. But Miss Greenwich was quick to remind me that I'd been moving around so much on the bank, jerking the line, that I probably scared all the fish away. I have to say she had a good point there. I was resigned to the fact that I was not cut out to be a fisherman. By all accounts, after an enjoyable, relaxing afternoon spent fishing and boating, I'm very glad to say we'd caught more than enough fish to feed an entire army, as the lake was extremely well stocked. Miss Greenwich had carefully stacked away all the fish neatly in a cooler box filled with plenty of ice. It was later in the evening, when Miss Greenwich opened the ice box, that she observed that all the fish had mysteriously vanished. Miss Greenwich was bemused when she found the ice box empty. For a long time she stared at it nonplussed, as she tried to make sense of this baffling conundrum. I guess for her it was rather like the time she nearly slipped over Natalie's sopping wet swimming costume lying in the middle of the dormitory floor, for at the time she couldn't understand what it was doing there. In the beginning, Miss Greenwich genuinely thought one of us had pulled a prank on her by clandestinely hiding the fish away to provoke some kind of shocked reaction from her. But no one came forward to admit to performing this less than amusing stunt, and so everyone was bewildered as to what had actually happened to the missing fish. Miss Greenwich shook her head of short grey curls, and as she did so, the bright red bead she was wearing swung around her neck backwards and forwards like a pendulum, as if they too were equally as frustrated as Mrs. Greenwich was over the case of the missing fish. Even on this camping trip, Miss Greenwich looked amazing. She was wearing one of her bright, cheery dresses. "There has to be a plausible explanation for these missing fish," she said, looking disheartened and confused. "I'm sorry, but there has to be a plausible explanation for these missing fish," she said, looking obviously disheartened and somewhat confused. "I'm sorry, fish don't just disappear randomly like this. Someone has come onto our camp and stolen the fish out of our icebox. But why would anyone do a thing like this? They could so easily catch their own fish at the lake, could they not? It's not as if the lake is low in any stock. There's plenty of fish to go around. So why would they have the blatant audacity to take our fish for themselves?" "Well, maybe they're lazy and hungry," came one of the girls' prompt replies. "But no one else is here at the White Oak Sanctuary, are they, Miss Greenwich?" One of the other pupils was quick to remind her. "Remember, we've got the place entirely to ourselves. No one else is here." "Well, then maybe there is a homeless person camped out in the trees over there. Living rough," suggested Miss Greenwich. "It wouldn't be the first time that such a thing has happened. Who knows, maybe the man is down on his luck and cannot fish without a line." No one seemed entirely convinced that some vagrant had stolen our fish, but Miss Greenwich seemed determined to uncover the mystery of how they'd done a walkabout. But some mysteries can never be solved, and I think eventually we all resigned ourselves to this fact. Luckily Miss Greenwich, who had a hearty appetite, had brought along with her way too much food, so despite the fact that we would not be eating any fish for dinner, we would at the very least be well fed, and no one would be going hungry. We had a barbecue that evening that consisted of marinated chicken pieces, lamb chops and some spicy ribs, which were served with plenty of salads and white bread rolls. The food was way more delicious than anything we would get at the boarding house, and so we overate to such an extent that we were practically bursting at the seams. But there was still more to come. When we sat by the open fire to enjoy the s'mores we were making and roasting marshmallows, it was Mrs. Cooper who suggested that it was traditional over a campfire to tell ghost stories, and everyone cheered and clapped with enthusiasm, as what could be better than listening to creepy ghost stories by a crackling fire underneath a canopy of twinkling stars. It just doesn't get better than that. It felt so sumptuously cosy, all of us gathered together, wearing our cute PJs while listening to stories. I was sincerely hoping that someone would have something interesting and exciting to tell us. It made me shiver with delight, the thought of listening to a scary, very spooky story. I loved being spooked from a distance, of course. Surely with 30 people gathered together around this fireside, someone would have a good ghost story to tell. Sadly, I would not be able to contribute anything, as I had no scary stories in my repertoire, which of course was an awful pity. A campfire is not a campfire without a good ghost story, Mrs. Cooper remarked. She was rubbing her hands together contentedly and casting her steely gaze on us, as if trying to discern who among us was sitting on a treasure trove of ghost stories. Finally she said, "Does anyone have a good ghost story to tell us? Come on, don't be shy. One of you must at the very least have had a weird experience of some kind you might like to tell us all about." Everybody began to look at the person sitting next to them, almost as if that person might raise their hand very suddenly and say, "Mrs. Cooper, I've got a story." But sadly that did not happen. All of a sudden one of the girls shouted out, "Go on, tell them, Blaine. You lived in a haunted house, didn't you? Tell them what happened to you. Please, Blaine." The girl turned around to address Mrs. Cooper. "Blaine's got some brilliant ghost stories, Mrs. Cooper. She told me lots of stuff in the dormitories at night. Scared me half to death, she did. Please tell them your story, Blaine," she encouraged. "Be a sport, will you?" "Is this true, Blaine, that you lived in a haunted house?" asked Mrs. Cooper, looking at Blaine curiously, with a flicker of excitement dancing around in her eyes. It would seem Mrs. Cooper loved to be spooked. I was to learn later that she was an avid fan of reading Stephen King's books. "Go on, tell us about it, Blaine. I'm extremely intrigued. I have always loved an excellent ghost story, and if you've got one hiding up your sleeve, we would love to hear it, wouldn't we, girls? Especially on a sparkling night such as this, when anything could be out there," she said, making her voice become so hauntingly eerie that everyone began to laugh. It was the first time I realized my rather emotionally repressed English teacher did actually have a sense of humour. Everyone chorused, "Yes, please, Blaine, tell us your story." "Do you believe in ghosts, Mrs. Cooper?" one of the pupils curiously asked her. "Well, I've got an open mind, dear, about such things," Mrs. Cooper informed us. "I do appreciate a very good scary story. I'm an avid fan of Stephen King. I'm totally devoted to his novels. Me personally, I think there is more to this life than we can ever imagine. It's only a fool that will claim otherwise." Mrs. Cooper turned her attention directly on Blaine. Expectation was written all over her face, which was so infectious that soon every head was turned directly on to Blaine, and every eye focused on her. She was a girl, I hasten to say, I didn't know terribly well. I had never got the privilege of sharing a dormitory with her, nor had I hung around with her on the school playground. Blaine looked a tad intimidated, suddenly finding herself the centre of attention on this unassuming night, with the sky so dazzlingly dappled by silvery stars and a pearly white luminescent moon. I knew by nature, of course, that Blaine had a reputation for being terribly shy. In truth, I didn't hold up much enthusiasm for what she would have to tell us, but I was in for a pleasant surprise, as Blaine seemed not only willing, but very eager to share her rather incredulous story with an interested audience, and maybe for once in her life she secretly enjoyed the attention she was receiving. Maybe she was getting some kind of thrill for being in the spotlight for once in her life. "Well, it's true, Mrs. Cooper. My parents bought a haunted house in Kentucky about 10 years ago. It was a horrible, horrible place," she said, shuddering, as if even remembering the house gave her a nasty attack of the heebie-jeebies. "I'm telling you, The moment we laid eyes on this dingy, airy house that my parents had bought, it gave me and my sister the creeps. The house was just awful. We always felt we were being watched in there by a pair of hostile eyes, and it freaked us out. I honestly don't know why my father was so excited about moving into the house in the first place. It was so soulless and forsaken. But he was so eager to do the place up. He thought that, he could make an investment out of it, I suppose. The house had an oppressive dark energy, as if something really bad had happened there. The estate agents actually told my parents that the owners claimed the house was haunted, and that was the quintessential reason they were actually selling the place for an absolute steal. They had knocked a hell of a lot off the asking price. The place, of course, needed a makeover, but it was structurally sound, and was worth far more than it was going for. But the owners wanted a very quick sale, and were almost over-eager to get the place off their hands. But let me tell you, that did not sound any alarm bells for my parents. My father was one of those men that couldn't look a gift horse in the mouth. So a stunning old Victorian house such as this, going for such a steal, literally made him salivate like a dog drooling over a bone. Let's just say whenever there was a bargain to be had, my father's nose would begin to twitch like a rabbit. He'd rub his hands with glee, and in that moment you knew he was going to get his wallet out and hand over his credit card to you. My dad believed they could do up the Victorian house cheaply. My mother was less enthusiastic, as by nature she was a tad lazy, and a do-it-yourself project didn't exactly float her boat. My mother told my father in no uncertain terms she loathed the house, which she felt gave off a sinister, very unendearing vibe. She wasn't surprised it was going cheap, as she thought who in their right mind would want to buy the place, and I wholeheartedly agreed with her on that. Unfortunately, in our household, my father always got his way with my mother. I guess he wore the pants, so what he said always went. My mother ultimately let him call all the shots. He told my mother that she was being ridiculous, and the house felt a bit bleak because it was in a desperate need of being refurbished. But once that was complete, my mother would realize how lucky we were to acquire such a fabulous house that in the future would sell for a vast fortune. So at the very least it would be a great investment, and we would get a good return for our money. "Goodness gracious me," said Mrs. Cooper, unable to disguise the look of horror on her face. "I will tell you, if an estate agent was to tell me that the reason the previous owners were selling their home was because it was haunted, that I would take such unsettling claims extremely seriously indeed. If the people were ever so eager to sell, they must have had a good reason for wanting to do so. Selling a house for a lot less than it's worth is a big giveaway as far as I'm concerned. My father used to say that you get nothing for free in this life, and if something is too good to be true, it probably is." Blaine shuffled awkwardly, with her arms hugging her legs tightly to her chest. She glanced up briefly at Mrs. Cooper and said, "My parents, they didn't believe in ghosts and stuff like that. My father wasn't worried about buying the Victorian house at all. On the contrary, I think he was rather excited about doing it up. My dad's a bit of a cheapskate, you see. Once a cheapskate, always a cheapskate, my mother has always said. She's right about that. My dad's a bit of a cheapskate, you see. Once a cheapskate, always a cheapskate. That's what my mum says. She's right. Let's just say my father to this very day is always sniffing around for a bargain at any given opportunity. And if there's one to be found, my dad will efficiently find it, like a cadaver dog finding a dead corpse." At this, everyone around the campfire began to laugh. "I'm not kidding you," said Blaine, her eyes widening as she made her point. "You have no idea what my father's like. Anything for a bargain. One time he bought dozens and dozens of socks. There were so many of them, just because they were going cheap. You got 70% off the asking price, I believe. I was with him at the time. He was loading the trolley with so many of these socks, looking ecstatic like the cat that had got all the cream. 'Look at all these socks,' he said. He looked at my mother and kept going on about what an amazing bargain it was. My mother said to him, 'Don't you think there's a reason they're going this cheap, love?' But my father just waved her away as if she was talking absolute nonsense. My dad thought he'd hoard all these socks away, so he'd have socks for years and years to come. He bought dozens of bags of these things, thinking that they would last forever. But when he opened up the packages, most of the socks were so badly made, they didn't last even a day. They were an inferior quality. But my dad never seems to learn from his mistakes. "My mother's exactly like that," came one girl's excited response. "She's always looking for a great deal. It drives me and my dad nuts. She wastes so much money on stuff we don't need. We've got closets full of loo rolls and shampoos. It's ridiculous." Blaine nodded at the girl with sympathy, as if she understood what she was talking about. She continued, "My mother hates the fact that Dad is such a cheapskate. My dad was so insistent on buying this old Victorian house that was presumed to be haunted. He mistakenly thought we'd make it into our dream home, with minimum expense. Don't get me wrong, the house, as I was saying, was very well built, was structurally sound, and had oodles of potential. Even my mother had the good grace to admit that. But there were these cold spots in the house that I could not explain. It was like you'd put your hand in a corner of a room, and it felt like you'd put your hand in an icebox. I mean, that's how incredibly cold it was. My father told my mum to keep stum about the fact that the estate agent had told them the house was haunted. My father did not believe for a second that this was true. He assumed it was an old house that made rackety noises, and those noises had obviously spooked the previous owners and scared them away. My father believed that kids like me and my sister could be incredibly impressionable, so he didn't want the mention of ghosts to inspire our imaginations. Once we'd moved into that God-forsaken place, me and my sister Abby refused to be apart. We shared a bedroom together. We had been looking so forward to having our own space, but not in that house. "That is unusual," admitted Mrs. Cooper. "In my experience, when children move to a brand new home, they can't wait to have their own exclusive bedrooms. But you wanted to share a room with your sister Abby. How on earth did your mother feel about that?" "Well, she wasn't best pleased, but what could she do? She wanted us to have our own bedrooms, but we insisted on sharing. We told my mother we hated the house and that it was too scary to sleep alone. She told us not to be silly, but I could see that there was a worried, tormented look etched on her face, which suggested to me that she'd also picked up on the negative vibe. I knew she wasn't entirely happy about the move. She did ask us if we had observed the cold patches around the house, and smelt the strong, offensive stench of cigar smoke that could sometimes be extremely pungent. It was on our stay on the second night at the house that things became very weird. We heard doors slamming loudly, feet running up the staircase, and people's faraway voices. It was strange, you could hear the talking, but not make out what was being said. My dad kept coming into our bedroom during the night, telling us we were making a big noise and we needed to keep the sounds down, as he was trying to get some sleep, and he didn't appreciate us slamming doors and running up and down the staircase like a couple of hooligans, when we were doing nothing of the sort, of course. "Some of us have work to do in the morning," he informed us. "It may be your school holidays, but it's your bedtime, and you need to get some quality sleep." We told him we hadn't made any of the noises, but he refused to believe us on this. It was during the day when we were at home we would hear whispering and giggling, but at night we'd hear a man's heavy boots thumping up and down the staircase, and that really scared the bejesus out of me and my sister Abby. Whenever you heard those thumping footsteps, everything else in the house just went mute. "Goodness gracious me!" interjected Mrs. Cooper. "How absolutely dreadful! I'm very glad I didn't have to stay in that house for sure." Well, it was awful. One night me and my sister Abby heard the boots storming outside our bedroom door, and then the door finally creaked open. I couldn't believe it, because I knew in that moment that the owner of those boots was now in our bedroom. I was petrified, as was my sister Abby. We knew someone was standing in the doorway, and we knew they were looking at us. You could tangibly feel those insidious eyes, almost as if they were burning me right through the sheets. The room became very, very cold. My heart began to pound violently in my chest, and all I wanted to do was scream at the top of my lungs, but nothing came out of my mouth, as if my tongue was tied. Me and my sister instinctively dived under the covers, and that was when the boots walked straight over to my bed at first, and then to my sister's bed. We could smell the terrible stench of tobacco. It was very strong. Then we heard this entity cough and wheeze like someone who has got stuffed up lungs. I hid under the bed sheets. I was too terrified to look at this thing. But I knew the entity knew we were both wide awake, and I believe he took great pleasure in scaring us half to death. The presence remained in our bedroom for a long time, just standing there watching us sleep, and then finally left the room after emitting a rather big disgruntled sigh. We heard the footsteps thundering away, almost as if the owner of the boots was in an obstinate, rather bad mood. Me and my sister were so affrighted, we hurriedly ran into my parents' bedroom to tell them what had happened to us. "Mum, there was a ghost in our bedroom! A horrible man! He walked over to our beds! He smelled strongly of cigar smoke! He was wheezing!" My father got indignantly angry with us and told us to stop making things up, and that there was no such thing as ghosts. We asked if we could sleep with my parents that night. My mother said, "But of course you can stay with us. You've had a dreadful fright, you poor things." But my father was having none of that. He immediately demanded for us to go back to our bedrooms and return to our beds, and to stop being such wimps. "The kids are not going to share a bed with us, is that understood? You hear me, Tonya?" he told my mother in no uncertain terms. "They're far too old for that sort of thing. We shouldn't be encouraging this." My mother subserviently nodded. She knew you had to tackle my father diplomatically, and when he was in a dogmatic mood like this, there was no reasoning with him. "I still think, love, the children have had a nasty, nasty scare. It's going to be hard for them to get back to sleep in this condition. Look how affrighted they are. Please let them share a bed with us just for tonight, only tonight. They really believe they saw something." "Listen to you, Tonya," my father retorted. "Our kids do not need mollycoddling, and that is exactly what you're doing. You're becoming a helicopter parent. We do not need to encourage our children to sleep with us. Before you know it, they'll do it every single night, given the opportunity. They are imagining things that are not there, that don't exist." "Daddy, please," I cried out. "Please, I'm begging you. Please let us stay in your bed just tonight. There was a horrible man in our room. I'm not joking about this, Daddy. I could feel him standing there. I didn't see him, but I know he was there. He was wheezing. Isn't that right, Abby?" "Yes, Daddy. He was wheezing. He was coughing. I could feel he was standing there. We heard him walking around on the bedroom floor." "See what you've done, Tonya?" my father snapped. "I blame you completely for this. You've told our children the estate agent told you our house was haunted, and now you've fed their imaginations, and they're dreaming up these ghostly entities they think they're seeing. Congratulations, love. This is an old house. Old houses make noises. That is all this is. I warned you about not telling the children about this, but no, you had to go and open up your big mouth, didn't you? You know how impressionable children are." "Lucan, don't be like this. I promise you I never told the children that the previous owners claimed the house was haunted. Maybe they were right, Lucan. Maybe it is haunted. How do you know that our children are making this stuff up in the first place? They've never told lies before. Maybe there is genuinely a ghost in the house, and I'm being serious, Lucan. Think about it for a moment. What about all the strange smells of tobacco in the house? What about all the running up the stairs? And the faraway voices we always hear? And what about the noisy footsteps that go up the staircase at night? You can't just put that down to strange noises in the house. There's something going on here. I'm sure there is." "Not you two, Tonya. Are you completely off your rocker, woman? If you're talking like this, is it any wonder our children are making up such preposterous claims? You're deliberately encouraging them to make all this nonsense up. What the hell is wrong with you? There are no such things as ghosts, and that is final. Kids, go back to your room right now, and for God's sake, stop whinging. You're not going to sleep in our bed with us tonight, and that is final. Now go to your bedrooms. Is that understood?" "Yes, Daddy. Yes, Daddy." My mother gave us a defeated, apologetic look. I knew she unequivocally believed our story. She was increasingly unsettled about the rather discomposing energy in the house, and I knew it bothered her greatly. I had overheard her telling her own sister that she felt watched all the time, and heard strange footsteps and faraway voices, and she had confirmed that tonight. "How dreadful!" said Mrs. Cooper. "Your poor mother! Your father obstinately refusing to believe the house was haunted. That must have been very distressing for the all of you. I can't imagine what it must be like not to be believed." It was very distressing, and the visits from this ghostly apparition, I'm afraid to say, did not stop there. Regretfully, the awful entity visited our bedroom every single night without fail. It terrified the bejesus out of the both of us, but it was completely useless going to my parents about it. We tried to keep our bedside lights on all night, but that didn't help at all because the bulbs would blow all the time. My father refused to replace them, as they were so expensive. In the end, me and my sister began to share a bed together almost every night, so we could cling to each other when the bedroom door opened and the footsteps walked over to the bed. I began to pray in earnest to God that the ghost would make himself known to my father, so he'd see that we hadn't lost our marbles, and there really was something haunting our house that clearly did not like us even being there. One night I opened my eyes in the darkness of our bedroom. It was very gloomy. On that occasion I must have fallen fast asleep, so when the ghost entered our room I hadn't actually heard him. So I found myself staring at this man. He was quite tall, wearing a Victorian hat. He had a pocket watch on and was wearing tails and smart black trousers. He was glaring at me furiously. He looked so formidable and so enraged. And then in a raspy voice he said, "Get the hell out of my house, the all of you! This is my home, and I want you all gone." He walked away and I heard him thundering down the staircase in his heavy boots. I was so dreadfully affrighted. I clutched my teddy bear so tightly and waited with bated breath for the morning to come. And it couldn't come soon enough. That night I had chosen to sleep in my own bed and not with my sister, because I decided to be brave, and I really regretted that. It turned out my sister Abby had seen and heard the ghost as well, so she was able to confirm what I saw. We both then told my mother what we'd seen, and she was very distressed about it all, but did not want us to tell our father about it, as he would only ridicule us. She told us she loathed the house and wished we could sell it, but Dad would not listen. She told us she would do everything in her power to make him see sense. She was worried the entity might get angry if we refused to leave, and it turned out she wasn't wrong about that. Things came to a head for us one day, when my mother was nonchalantly hoovering the staircase. She was on the lower steps, and glanced up because she felt as if something was watching her, and that was when she observed a very well-dressed, rather distinguished debonair Victorian gentleman glaring down at her through enraged brown eyes. He screamed at her, "I told you to get the hell out of my house! Why won't you listen?" The man then vanished before her eyes, in a wisp of what seemed like smoke. Seconds later, as she was making her way up the staircase rather reluctantly, with a wicker basket in her hand, containing our clean laundry that she was going to replace in our closets, she felt a hand on her back, and then she was violently twisted around and pushed down the staircase, and my mother landed at the very bottom, but she was no worse for wear, luckily. She looked up at the staircase to see the angry Victorian man waving his fists furiously at her and telling her, "Get the hell out of this house! If you don't, I'll make sure that much worse things become of you." My mother was so terrified, she abandoned everything, even our clean laundry that was spread all over the floor. She picked us up from school and took us to live with her sister. She told my father in no uncertain terms that if he didn't sell the old Victorian house, that she would immediately file for divorce, as there was no way she was going back to live there. That was the first time my mother ever stood up to my father, and I was really proud of her for that. Me and my sister were absolutely elated that we would never go back to the Victorian house ever again. My father and mother actually separated for about 6 months, while my father worked tirelessly on the Victorian house, but his renovating stirred up more trouble for him and made the Victorian gentleman absolutely furious. So much so that my father woke up one night only to find the Victorian man standing over him and trying to strangle him in his sleep, telling him, "I told you to get out of my house. The rest of your family listened to me, but you didn't. What's wrong with you? Get out or I'll kill you." That was when my father realized that ghosts were real. And he got the hell out of that house, I can tell you, as fast as he could. He moved in with my mother's sister. And, the rest is history, really. "What happened to the house?" asked Mrs. Cooper. "I'm curious about that." "Well, my dad contacted the estate agent, who initially sold the house to us, and the first thing she said to my father is, 'What took you so long?' I guess she knew the ghostly entity would throw us out." "Goodness gracious me. Did your mother do any research on the property?" "Yes, she did, as a matter of fact. She discovered that in 1837, that was about the time when Queen Victoria was on the throne in England. That was when the house was purchased by a Mr. Leonard Newland. I gather he was a very formidable man, not liked by many people. My mother found a newspaper article about him. Apparently both of his 2 daughters mysteriously vanished one day, never to be seen again. And shortly after his wife also disappeared. It was rumoured that Leonard was behind their disappearances, but of course they couldn't prove anything." "Of course they couldn't prove anything," said Mrs. Cooper. "The man was cunningly sly, obviously repugnantly vile when he was alive, and my guess is he disposed of his entire family. It was obvious he was a nasty piece of work. The way he threw your poor mother down the staircase speaks volumes. She could have been killed. Those accidents are not fun by any manner of means." "It's funny you should say that, Mrs. Cooper. One of the servants who worked for Leonard claimed he was always fighting with his wife and both of his daughters. She believed he'd killed them in an act of rage, and clandestinely buried them somewhere. Leonard was a man of high standing. He knew people in high places, the influencers and shakers of the day, so to speak. So everything was very much kept cloak and dagger and under wraps. So it was assumed that Leonard's daughters and mother had simply moved away. But I understand that Leonard's own son, Rupert, was extremely suspicious about his father. He believed his father had killed the family members. The servant also overheard an argument in the house between Rupert and his father Leonard, and Rupert was saying, "What have you done with them? You are behind the disappearance of both my sisters and my mother. Where are they? You tell me where they are. You've killed them, haven't you?" "I am like you, well of the same mind, Mrs. Cooper. I believe Leonard did kill his wife and his daughters, and I also think they were trapped in the house that we lived in, because we often heard disembodied women's voices and giggling during the day, and sometimes at night too, and light footsteps rushing up the staircase. But I did notice every time me and my sister heard Leonard's boots thumping around the house, everything would become mute. The strange thing is that a year after his daughter's disappearance, Leonard was found hanging on a tree in the backyard of the property. They assumed he had committed suicide, but I suspect otherwise. So does my mother." "So let me see, Blaine. You believe that Rupert killed his father Leonard in revenge for killing his 2 sisters and his mother, and arranged his death to look exactly like a suicide?" "How do you know, Mrs. Cooper? That's exactly what I think." "Well, let's just say I've got instincts about these things. I do believe that that is what happened. I imagine Rupert was very distressed to lose his mother and 2 sisters. Furious about it, I would suspect. And as a result, he probably killed his father and made the death look like a suicide. It makes a lot of sense to me." "Whoa, that is some story you've told us. I never expected this, Blaine," I interjected. "Thanks for sharing it with us."
"And thank you from all of us, Blaine," said Mrs. Cooper. "I just hope we'll all get some sleep tonight. But I can assure anybody who's concerned that the ghost of Leonard is not around here in the Ozarks, so you shall not be disturbed in your sleep tonight. When it comes to your father, Blaine, I think the moral of the story tonight is that if something is going cheap, like that Victorian house clearly was, and it looks too good to be true, it probably is. Don't ever let a cheap price cloud your judgment, girls. Now I want you all to go and brush your teeth, go to the toilet, and then tuck yourselves into your sleeping bags in your tent. Me and Mrs. Greenwich here do not want to hear a single word out of any of you until the morning. Unless, of course, it's terribly important. Is that understood?"
"Yes, Mrs. Cooper," everyone chorused. I could see everybody on this camping trip was absolutely exhausted, without exception. And in truth, I don't think I can remember a time I felt more fatigued. I had muscles that were aching in places that I didn't even know existed. Natalie had informed us, before we retired to our sleeping bags, that she'd be waking us up at 10 past midnight to go for a swim in the lake. I don't mind admitting to you, I was secretly hoping that Natalie would oversleep and fail to wake up. But I was in for a big disappointment. It must have been midnight when I found myself being vigorously shaken around in my sleeping bag. I looked up through groggy eyes, only to see Natalie smiling down at me, with a big grin on her face. Why was it that Natalie seemed totally incapable of being tired like the rest of us? Couldn't she see how dead beat we were? The last thing I wanted right now was to go for a swim in the lake.
"Wake up, sleepyhead! It's 10 past 12. We're going swimming in the lake, remember? I took a peek outside our tent. It's beautiful out there. Now get dressed into your swimming costume." Next it was Laura and Claudia's turn to be shaken wide awake by an ever so enthusiastic Natalie, who was one of those people that could thrive on 4 hours sleep and seemed unable to comprehend how anyone else needed any longer to get some sleep. She seemed to have no comprehension that it had been an exhausting day at the Ozarks, and getting up in the middle of the night to enjoy a midnight swim did not seem desperately exciting right now. But Natalie's ebullience made it almost impossible to refuse her, although Claudia did bitterly complain as she pulled the sleeping bag over her head and said, "Why don't you all go? Leave me here in the tent. I'm just dead beat, I really am." Natalie's infectious ebullience made it practically close to impossible to refuse her, although Claudia did complain as she pulled the sleeping bag right over her head. "Why don't you all go? Leave me here in the tent. I'm dead beat. I need some more sleep," she said. Natalie refused to take no for an answer. She practically scooped Claudia out of her sleeping bag. "I'm not sure I'm up for this, Natalie," Claudia complained. "I've got a bit of a throbbing headache, and I'm dead beat. I'm awfully tired. Please let me sleep a little longer." Natalie raised a brow. "I don't want to listen to your excuses, Claudia. We agreed when we got to the Ozarks we would swim together in the lake in the middle of the night. We won't get another opportunity like this. You can have as much sleep as you like when we get back to school, but out here we need to make the most of every opportunity." "I suppose you're right," Claudia said in resignation, wiping the sleep away from her eyes. "Honestly," chided Natalie, "anyone think you were doing me a big favour by agreeing to come along with me for a swim? But we're the fearsome four, aren't we? This is what we always do. We're a team." Before we knew it, we were all dressed in our bathing costumes and ready to have our midnight swim. "You're not going to regret any of this," Natalie assured us. "Imagine if we went home and wasted this opportunity of swimming in a lake at midnight in the Ozarks under the glittering stars. We would be chastising ourselves, wouldn't we, for being so bone idle? We're making memories here. How many people do you know would wake up at this time of night to enjoy a swim? Everyone in the tents are fast asleep, and we're here having barrels of fun. What could be better than this?" "You know what I think about you, Natalie? You're going into the wrong profession. You shouldn't become a vet," I said sarcastically. "You should be a salesperson or a politician." "What's that supposed to mean?" Natalie giggled. "It means you can sell us anything, like swimming in a lake in the middle of the night when we're dead beat. Not everyone could do that, you know." "You mean I can sell snow to an Eskimo?" Natalie chuckled. "Something like that," I said. "Although, come to think of it, the military might suit you a whole lot better. You're a hard taskmaster, Natalie, and my guess is when the soldiers in your battalion are completely spent, you'd make them do 1,000 more sit-ups." "Honestly, you're making me sound like a slave driver, Philippa. We're doing this because we're intrepid explorers, are we not? We're the fearsome four. Have you forgotten that?" "I cannot believe we're actually doing this," said Claudia. "We're all so tired, and now we're going for a midnight swim. You have to admit it, it's kind of crazy. Are we completely out of our minds? Let's just say if Miss Greenwich or Mrs. Cooper knew what we were getting up to,
We'd be in so much trouble. That's why we're thrill seekers, said Natalie. We live in the moment, don't we? We're intrepid adventure seekers. We have reputations to live up to, don't we? I will admit that getting out of my sleeping bag and changing into my swimming costume had been a laborious, tiresome struggle. But I had got dressed as quickly as I could, so I didn't have to think about what I was doing. My body felt as floppy and uncompliant as a rag doll, and every single muscle in my entire body ached. But somehow, as usual, Natalie had successfully bamboozled us out of our tents. We soon took the short path to the lake, and I will admit, even in my sleepy, somewhat disenchanted state, I was slowly but surely beginning to wake up. By the time we dived into the deliciously cool water of the lake, we were having the time of our lives. I felt invigorated and refreshed. We were playing around like little kids, splashing each other and enjoying the Milky Way stretched out before our heads, reflected in the water, and I will admit it was breathtakingly beautiful, and in that quintessential poignant moment, I can honestly say I regretted absolutely nothing. I would be able to look back on this point in time, in years to come, and remember this very special magical moment, swimming under a galaxy of silvery stars at the dead of night like this. Suffice to say, Natalie was rather full of herself. She couldn't hide the self-satisfied, smug I-told-you-so look on her face. "This is amazing," she said. "I don't know about you, but I wouldn't have missed this for the entire world. Am I right? Or am I right?" she asked. We all had to admit that, as usual, Natalie was absolutely right. The swim in the lake had been absolutely magnificent. We knew the following night we would do it again, and take another dip in these refreshing waters. We needed to make the most of being here at the Ozarks, and I fully intended to enjoy myself thoroughly, for there was not much time left to be around my friends, as the following year was looming around the very next corner. As I was reflecting over this, and my friends were splashing wildly around in the water, that was when I saw him standing there among the trees, staring at us with bright yellow eyes. This thing was so tall and so humongous, and looked to be covered in hair. I saw him so fleetingly as the moonlight spilled across his face, but then I told myself in no uncertain terms that that had to be a trick of the light. I didn't see anything, I persuaded myself. Maybe I am so fatigued from all this physical exertion and all the excitement of being here at the Ozarks that I was making up things in my head like you do when you're dreaming. I decided not to speak of what I thought I'd seen to my friends, because maybe it really had just been a deception on my part. A shifting of shadows, perhaps. That night when we returned to our sleeping bag, I was gripped with a sense of very grave disquiet, as I thought about what I thought I had seen. But before I could reflect on such ruminations, once my head hit the pillow of my sleeping bag, I was out like a light. Needless to say, the following morning, it was a fearsome forced tent that was very quiet, as we all slept in for good reason, and subsequently missed breakfast, but we didn't care. The swim at the lake had made it all worth our while. I think all the other students thought we were a tad lazy, not getting up in time for breakfast, but little did they know that while they were fast asleep in their sleeping bags, we were painting the Ozarks red, like teenagers out on the town. The next day was quite similar to the previous one, with a few discernible differences, you could say. We enjoyed plenty of walking up rugged, steep, sometimes treacherous trails, which was then followed by a stint of fishing and boating in the late afternoon. Needless to say, Miss Greenwich became very possessive over the icebox, never letting it out of her sight. She didn't want the previous incident of last night to be repeated again. I'm glad to say the icebox remained full, and we had a delicious fish dinner that night, cooked on a grill over open flames, and there are no words to describe how good that fish tasted. It literally melted in our mouths like butter. I wish I could say the ghost stories around the fire that night were good, but they were pathetically lame, I'm afraid, so much so that I can barely remember what was said. But stories were invariably told. But what they were, well, your guess is as good as mine. But let's just say, no story could measure up with Blaine's from the previous night. Still, we had a very enjoyable evening, and finally returned to our tents, as we had done the night before, with the same regimental routine. The fearsome four, of course, knew that our evening was not yet over yet, We would enjoy a light sleep, and at 12:10, Natalie would invariably be dragging us out of our sleeping bags. But in a strange way, after our fun in the lake the night before, I was looking forward to another adventure in the cool water of the lake, and so were the rest of us. As can be predicted, in her usual determined form, Natalie began to arouse the sleeping dead from their sleeping bags. It was once again not a task for the faint-hearted to wake us up out of our peaceful slumber. Soon we were rudely disturbed by the piercing abrupt ringtone of Natalie's voice in our ears, telling us to wake up. I was groggy with sleep. The fresh air of the Ozarks had worked its magic on me, and I had fallen under the grip of its enchanting spell. So despite my misgivings about getting up, I was looking forward to this intrepid adventure. It was exciting being the only ones up and about at this time of night. I dare say the camp was hauntingly quiet, airily so. So it would seem the resolute lion within Natalie was not to be tamed, and in her normal robust, persuasive manner, she had masterfully managed to get us out of our sleeping bags and finally dressed into our swimming costumes. We were now trudging off to the lake again, like soldiers being marched off to their vantage points in a war zone. Jokes aside, once we reached the lake and dipped our toes into the sweet cool water and finally dived into the silver resplendence of the lake, we nursed no regret, and for a moment time almost seemed to stand still. All of a sudden, as we were splashing around in the water, I nearly fainted from shock because I saw the figure of Mrs. Cooper charging towards us. Oh my God, she had seen us! She had uncovered our naughty little secret, and now we were as good as dead, I thought. That woman was notorious for being quite strict, and she was going to be furious with us for disobeying the rules of the camp and leaving our tents in the middle of the night to go swimming. My heart was beginning to do flip-flops in my chest, and I could smell trouble brewing in the air as strongly as the wood smoke from the fire earlier on in the evening. Far from appearing irate and furious with us, incongruously Mrs. Cooper seemed very calm and circumspect. She was fully attired in clothes I'd never seen before. She wasn't wearing pyjamas or even a dressing gown, which in itself was decidedly odd. If that wasn't weird enough, she was wearing sunglasses in the middle of the night. Now I ask you, who on earth wears sunglasses when the sky is as black as a pot of ink? This was absolutely extraordinary. I didn't know what to make of it. I began to wonder if Mrs. Cooper could possibly be sleepwalking. Why was she acting so weird? I couldn't be sure, but something felt off. By this time we were all standing up in the lake, our head and shoulders above the water, looking at Mrs. Cooper with faces completely drained of blood. For we had not expected to get caught red-handed like this, doing something we shouldn't be doing. Finally Mrs. Cooper reached the edge of the lake, where the four of us had become as paralysed as wax statues. I held my breath as Mrs. Cooper called out, "Claudia Salazar, I need a word with you, please, in private if I may. Please come out of the water, will you? The rest of you can carry on swimming if you like." We were rather baffled, because Mrs. Cooper was behaving very strangely. You would think the woman would be absolutely incensed with us, but far from it, she was behaving as if a swim in the lake in the middle of the night was perfectly normal. Without a shadow of doubt, I would have expected Mrs. Cooper to have blown a gasket, but then again I reminded myself we were on holiday in the Ozarks after all, so maybe she had chosen to be more lenient with us in the circumstances, and turn a blind eye to our mischievous, unorthodox behaviour, which in itself was a big relief. All I could ponder is why did she want to speak to Claudia on her own? Claudia looked rather nervous as she paddled out of the water towards Mrs. Cooper, almost as if she sensed she was in a whole heap of trouble. But why was Mrs. Cooper not laying into the rest of us? I'm not sure what Mrs. Cooper was saying to Claudia. I watched Claudia dry herself, while Mrs. Cooper waited for her to put on her sneakers. She was nodding at Mrs. Cooper, but glancing back at us a couple of times with a somewhat bewildered expression on her face. She shrugged her shoulders, almost as if to indicate to us that she didn't have a clue what this was all about. Join the club, I thought. I had no idea what was going on. It's funny, but being caught red-handed, doing something you know you shouldn't be doing, isn't as thrilling as you would think it would be. It certainly steals your joy. So we gave up on the swim and were heading towards the shore to dry ourselves with our towels, put on our sneakers, and return back to our tents. That was when we watched Mrs. Cooper She was holding Claudia's hand, and they were walking away from our camp, towards the woods. Now this was beyond weird, and seeing Claudia's strange behaviour was mystifying. What on earth were they both doing, I wondered. I persuaded myself that maybe Claudia wanted to answer a call of nature, and Mrs. Cooper was taking her to some shrubbery, where she could relieve herself. But why was she holding Claudia's hands in the first place, as if chaperoning a small child? Laura and Natalie were shaking their bodies of excess water and drying themselves vigorously with their towels. I overheard Natalie saying to Laura, "Ooh, that was close, wasn't it? When I saw Mrs. Cooper coming towards the lake, my heart just sank. I thought she was going to blast us. But instead she was so nonchalant about us swimming around in the water at this time of the night. She was actually cool about it. I wonder why Mrs. Cooper wanted to see Claudia. She didn't even seem angry. Don't you think she was acting out of character? She was fully dressed and wearing dark glasses in the middle of the night. How could she possibly see through those things? Who wears dark glasses at night, I ask you?" "It beats me," said Laura. "I can't imagine how she can see anything at all. It's like walking around the place with a blindfold on, don't you think? But as you say, why didn't she lose it with us for swimming in the lake? I thought she was about to have our guts for garters. But like you say, she was so indifferent about us breaking all the rules. Mrs. Cooper, don't get me wrong, I like the woman, but it doesn't take much to set her off into a tangent, and she's always been one of those helicopter teachers that likes everyone to follow the rules step by step. So why she's behaving like this, God only knows." I left my friends discussing the oddity of Mrs. Cooper's strange behaviour. My heckles had risen. I sensed immediately that something was off. Normally Natalie was the sharp one among us, but I was the only one that had my eye on the ball this evening, and I didn't intend to let it out of my sight. I needed to investigate what was going on. Mrs. Cooper's behaviour was paradoxically enigmatic to me. She had not been angry with us for swimming in the lake. She was fully dressed, wearing sunglasses in the middle of the night. She was holding Claudia Salazar's hand and leading her through the woods, away from where we were camped out in the middle of the night. This was not normal. With my attention alert and every hair on my head standing up on end, I discreetly followed Claudia and Mrs. Cooper into the woods, after grabbing my torch, but I failed to put on my sneakers in time, which was a big mistake. It was so dark under the shaded canopy of the trees, so much so that I could barely see my own hand in front of my face. So I was stumbling around awkwardly in the dark, like a blind man, very nearly tripping over jagged rocks that were jutting out of the soil like sharp teeth. I was too afraid to switch on my torch, in case I drew attention to myself. Luckily Claudia had her torch on, and it lit up the way ahead of me, so it was easy to see where she was going with Mrs. Cooper. I could not for the life of me understand why they were walking so deep into the heart of the woods together. What the hell was Mrs. Cooper up to? All of a sudden the tuneful trills of the crickets and frogs became mute. Everything became very quiet, which affirmed to me that something was definitely amiss. I gasped with relief when some generous trickles of moonlight suddenly projected their way through the forest canopy, so I could see so much more clearly. It was incredibly awkward to walk on my bare feet down these less than friendly footpaths. I winced in agonizing pain as a couple of thorns pierced through my heel. At this point my heart was beginning to wilt in my chest, rather like a dying flower, for I felt that something was terribly wrong. I just knew this in every single fibre of my being. I think Mrs. Cooper must have sensed my presence, for she turned around very suddenly, and was looking directly at me. She removed her glasses from her eyes, and that was when I saw the vindictive yellow eyes staring at me, the same eyes I'd seen the previous night from the woods, when I was swimming in the lake. Then I knew that this woman who claimed to be Mrs. Cooper was not our English teacher at all, but an impostor that had managed to mimic her with some kind of shape-shifting techniques. So I cried out, "Get away from her, Claudia! This is not Mrs. Cooper you're with! Get away from her! She's tricking you! Get away from her, Claudia!" In that poignant moment, things happened far too quickly for comfort, because Mrs. Cooper, who wasn't Mrs. Cooper, growled at me contemptuously. And that growl, it wasn't human. Suddenly Mrs. Cooper dropped the holographic projection she was wearing as a disguise, and in a trice I saw what was really hiding behind her mask. It was a monstrous beast of a creature, covered in shiny dark brown hair. This huge gargantuan creature looked to be a cross between an otter and a human being, which is the only way I can describe it to you. But this thing, whatever it was duplicitously cunning, as it had successfully lured Claudia away from the lake, and deceived her. When Claudia realized she'd been taken in by this hideous thing, she tried desperately to break free from the creature, but the creature began to hold her down, and his grip on her was steadfast. "Let me go! Let me go!" she cried out. She glanced at me with a desperate pleading look on her face. "Help me, Philippa! Help me!" she cried out. The creature simply threw Claudia on his back, like a sack of potatoes. Claudia was screaming, as this otter-like creature began running through the grove. I tried to pursue the creature, I really did, shouting after him, "No, let her go! Please, don't do this, don't do this!" At this point my feet were literally shredded. They were so cut up, and there was blood everywhere. I tried desperately to chase after this creature, but it was no good. I could never even get close to it. It ran away so very fast. With a heavy heart I returned to the lake. My friends, believe it or not, were still there drying themselves when I reached them. They had been chatting together, but stopped talking at once, almost as if sensing something was terribly wrong. I began to gasp for breath as I tried to tell them the horrifying truth about what had happened to Claudia Salazar, but no words came out. "What the hell is the matter with you, Philippa? You look as if you've seen a ghost. Are you all right?" asked Natalie, her face growing deep with concern. Finally I managed to say, It's Claudia. It's Claudia." "What about Claudia?" asked Natalie, her jaw beginning to tighten, as she sensed what I had to tell her was not going to be good. "She's gone!" I cried out. "I don't think she's ever coming back. We're never going to see her again. No one will ever find her." "What the hell do you mean, Philippa? You're not making any sense. You're not pulling my leg, are you? Because if you are, I don't find this funny. Not at all." Finally I managed to regain my composure, although how I did I can't be sure. I'm not joking, Natalie. Claudia's gone. I don't think we'll ever see her again." "What the hell are you talking about? You're scaring me half to death. I saw Claudia moments ago with Mrs. Cooper. Now you're saying she's gone? You're not making any sense at all. That you don't understand. That wasn't Mrs. Cooper you saw. It was something pretending to be Mrs. Cooper. That could speak and act like her and look like her. But it wasn't her. It knew things, like Claudia's surname and I think things about us. I don't know how. It has powers. It's evil." That was when I informed my horrified friend about the giant ottoman I'd encountered, and how it had snatched Claudia away, running with her into the heart of the woods, and how it had shape-shifted in front of my very eyes, and then I'd seen what it really was, and it was the scariest thing I'd ever beheld. Those yellow eyes had been absolutely haunting. "But that can't be," said Natalie. "Monsters aren't real. We believed in them when we were kids, didn't we? But what you're describing sounds so fictitious." "I don't know what this thing was," I explained. "It was huge, standing up on two legs like a man. It had a massive tail like an otter. It did look to be a cross between an otter and a man. That's the only way I can describe it. That's why I'm calling it an otterman." As my friends appreciated the gravity of what I was saying, it hit them really hard. Tears spilled down their cheeks, and we all began to weep. They, of course, knew that chasing after a creature such as this was a fruitless expedition. But we still had to alert the teachers to tell them what had happened. And if my friends were struggling to believe my account, how would the teachers even react? Natalie took charge and said, "I think we should only speak to Miss Greenwich about this. I don't want us to share these startling revelations with Mrs. Cooper. She'll never believe a single word of it. I know she won't. She says she's got an open mind about ghosts, and maybe that is true. But I rather think she'll draw the line if we tell her a big creature that resembles an otter and a man took Claudia away. We need to speak to Miss Greenwich. She's a lot more open-minded about things like this. You've known her for years, Philippa. She'll know you're not making this up." The three of us were in such a dreadful state, so with our hair still wet and still sporting our swimming costumes, we set back to camp, our hearts heavy with grievous despair, and a vacuous sense of emptiness. It was still very dark outside, cloyingly so, and was at a guess probably about 1:30 in the morning. I was the one that ultimately led the way to the teacher's tent to get help, although I knew unequivocally there was nothing we could do to help Claudia now. It was all too late for that. "Miss Greenwich! Miss Greenwich!" I called out. I could hear a groan in the tent, a shuffle of material, which I assumed was a sleeping bag. There was a movement as if someone was getting up, and thankfully I heard Miss Greenwich tell Mrs. Cooper she'd get it. All I can say is thank God it was Miss Greenwich and not Mrs. Cooper that poked her head out of the tent. I could see the woman was only half awake. She wiped the debris of sleep away from her eyes, and I wondered with a very broken heart how she was going to react when I told her the story that would sound so implausible and far-fetched. "This better be good, girls," said Miss Greenwich, understandably sounding a little grumpy. She glanced over at us with an expression of confoundment on her face, as she suddenly realized we were not wearing our pajamas. "Look at you! You're wet! You're all wearing swimming costumes. Don't tell me you've been swimming in the lake, without any supervision in the middle of the night. You know you're not allowed to leave your tents unless a call of nature demands your attention. But you've dishonoured the rules. You've been swimming. Why would you do this? Sometimes I really despair with you girls. I'm grateful I don't always know what goes on behind my back, or I think I would quite literally have a heart attack," she said, suddenly clutching her chest tightly. Finally she said with a big exasperated sigh, "What was so important that it couldn't wait for the morning?" she asked, her pale blue eyes fixing steadily on me, as if in some way she knew that I was the one that was equipped to answer this question for her. "Miss Greenwich," I said, lowering my voice into a muted whisper, in the beleaguered hope that Mrs. Cooper, who was obviously asleep in the teacher's tent, did not overhear our conversation. "Miss Greenwich," I repeated twice over. My words sounded so fearful that in that moment Miss Greenwich's blue eyes, that had previously been subdued by a sluggish tiredness, suddenly grew wide with attention. "What is it, Philippa?" she asked, her voice tightening with trepidation. "Is something wrong?" "It's Claudia Salazar, Miss Greenwich." Miss Greenwich's blue eyes, that had previously been subdued by a sluggish exhaustion, suddenly grew wide with attention. "What is this, Philippa?" she said, her voice tightening with trepidation. "Is something wrong?" "It's Claudia Salazar, Miss Greenwich." Miss Greenwich's face grew white, almost as if she knew the news I was about to convey was not good. What about her? Speak up, dear." She was abducted." "Abducted?" gasped Mrs. Greenwich. "But how do you know? Did you see the man that did this?" "Miss Greenwich, that's it. The thing that took Claudia. It wasn't a man." "It wasn't a man?" asked Miss Greenwich, looking grave. "You're saying a wild animal took Claudia away? Please, God, no," she said, throwing her hand over her mouth. I proceeded to tell Miss Greenwich about the creature that had pretended to be Mrs. Cooper, and how I'd been suspicious because Mrs. Cooper had been acting weird and wearing dark glasses in the middle of the night. I told her how I discreetly followed the creature, and how it had miraculously shape-shifted from Mrs. Cooper into an otterman, and then run off with Claudia so fast that there was not a hope in hell of catching up with him. I then burst into tears. "You do believe me, don't you, Miss Greenwich? I'm telling you the truth, I am. I think this thing has eaten Claudia. It's too late to help her. It's long gone now. I've never seen anything run that fast. What are we going to do?" I whimpered. "I believe you, dear," said Miss Greenwich. 1000%, actually. I've heard of such creatures before. There is a name for that creature. I wish I could remember it, but I just don't. I do know things like this exist, and they're very clever. They have shape-shifting techniques. They use this to lure their prey. You're right. It is too late to help Claudia. Far too late, I'm afraid." "But what are we going to do, Miss Greenwich?" "We are going to call the sheriff. But you cannot tell him, Philippa, what you have told me. He'd never believe a single word of it. Never. Do you understand that? He'd think you had made the whole thing up.
and that would make you look very suspicious, as if you had something to hide, and you were making up a very unlikely story." "Well, what are we going to tell the sheriff?" I asked. "You are going to tell the sheriff what you told me, Philippa. But you can say you don't know who her abductor was because you didn't have a good look at him. It was very dark. Is that understood? It's a reasonable thing for you to say. No one would doubt your word on that." As you can imagine, in no time at all the sheriff had been notified. Everybody was roused from their tents, still wearing their pyjamas, their hair tousled, eyes heavy with sleep, only to be met by flashing blue lights, a plethora of police cars. So confounded and confused were the anxious voices from the girls in my year, all asking what on earth was going on, and why the hell were the police at our campsite, in the middle of the night like this. To all intents and purposes, Mrs. Cooper was not handling herself at all well. She was overwrought with emotion. Miss Greenwich, on the other hand, remained dignified, attentive, and calm, which was why she'd always been such a good matron over the years. Mrs. Cooper appeared to be beside herself with grief. She was terribly upset with us, in particular me, for not abiding by the rules, and for leaving our tents in the middle of the night for a swim. She began to flap around like a bird with a broken wing, looking flustered and very disgruntled. "What on earth is wrong with you, Philippa?" she said, doggedly focusing her formidable attention directly on me, as if in some way she saw me as the instigator of this daredevil swim at the lake that had ultimately led to Claudia's abduction. She pointed an accusatory finger at me and said, "Well, I hope you're proud of yourself, young lady. I cannot believe you had the blatant audacity to go swimming in the lake in the middle of the night like this. None of this would happen if you had stayed in your tents as you were supposed to do. But no, you couldn't help yourself, could you? Any opportunity to break the rules, and you will take it, won't you, Philippa?" The sheriff, having overheard Mrs. Cooper going off in a tangent at me, came over to rescue me from the firing squad of her accusations that were being launched at me indiscriminately. To be fair, I guess I had claimed to see the abductor running through the woods, so Mrs. Cooper invariably thought I was the one that needed to be seriously reprimanded. The sheriff could see I was visibly very upset, with red puffy eyes and tears that did not care to hold themselves back. I think he emphatically believed Mrs. Cooper was being extremely unreasonable and rather objectionable towards me, as she looked for someone to blame for this fiasco. It would seem everybody was visibly upset, and some people took the news of Claudia's abduction worse than others. But Miss Greenwich, in her usual matriarch fashion, was talking to the students and offering everybody big dollops of creamy comfort with her kind, reassuring manner. I would not have expected anything less from that remarkable woman, who looked over us like a mother hen protecting all her chickens. The sheriff was a very kind-looking man, in his early 50s, I suspect, with short-cropped grey hair and very, very attractive blue eyes. He was rather stout, with a large stomach that drooped over his belt. "Look, Mrs. Cooper, this is not the girl's fault. We should not be playing the blame game here. I don't know about you, Mrs. Cooper, but when I was of similar age, I guess I might have been sorely tempted myself to slip out of the tent in the middle of the night to swim in a lake like that. So don't be too hard on the teenagers for doing what teenagers invariably do. And I would like to remind you that they're not kids anymore. They're young adults." "But, Sheriff, if it wasn't for Philippa here, Claudia would not have been abducted." "Well, you don't know that for sure, do you, Mrs. Cooper? And it doesn't do singling someone out for the blame. The only person responsible for this catastrophe is the abductor himself. You're acting like a cook who's blaming the ingredients for a bad meal. I was speaking to Miss Greenwich about the missing fish in the icebox that occurred the previous day. I happened to find this very, very interesting." "But what about them?" asked Mrs. Cooper, her eyes growing wide. "You don't think the person who stole the fish from the icebox abducted Claudia Salazar, do you?" "Well, we're looking into the matter, Mrs. Cooper. Nothing must go unchecked. Let's just say I do find this information to be very interesting. It does indeed suggest that someone might have been watching your campsite for some time, probably hiding in the shadows. They obviously took it upon themselves to venture close to your camp, so that they were able to steal all the fish that you caught from the icebox. We've been looking for a man for quite some time, who abducted a woman on a footpath very close to here. He left her for dead, I'm afraid, after having sexually assaulted her. We have good reason to believe he's living rough, and might have been the man that abducted Claudia. I don't wish to unduly alarm you, Mrs. Cooper, about this matter, but let's just say this man has been on the run for a very long time. He's extremely elusive, rather like the Scarlet Pimpernel, I'm afraid. No sooner does someone have a sighting of him, he appears to just vanish into thin air. We have had no new leads concerning him, until now, I suspect. The man is described as unhinged and extremely dangerous. Well, if that is the case, why are you just standing there, Sheriff, like the Incredible Hulk, asking dumb questions? For goodness sake, find Claudia Salazar before it's too late, will you? Go and look for her. Do your job, for goodness sake. Claudia Salazar could be lying there, somewhere, dying on a footpath, and in desperate need of help. I don't want to be the one to contact her Aunt Eva and deliver this bad news to her. Can you imagine how her aunt is going to feel about her niece vanishing like this? Claudia has lost both of her parents very tragically to drug abuse. She only has her aunt left, and I don't think her Aunt Eva is going to cope with these horrifying revelations of her abduction. It's never easy to give a loved one bad news, Mrs. Cooper. I am the first person to know that. But we will handle things as sensitively as possible. This is the Ozarks, Mrs. Cooper, and the White Oak Sanctuary is a significantly large place. We've got people searching for Claudia even as I speak, even though the sun hasn't come out yet. That is how resolutely determined I am to find her. We are doing the best we can in the circumstances. I do, of course, need to ask the pupils here some questions, Mrs. Cooper, to try and establish what they may know. I would appreciate it if you would let me do my job. It's not good enough, Sheriff. It really isn't. We need to find Claudia Salazar at once. Any delay could be completely deadly. I've read enough detective novels to know these things. Look, Mrs. Cooper, there is no need to get hysterical about this. Everyone needs to calm down. Panic is going to only serve to derail us all. I would like to ask the girls here, if I may, if anyone noticed any suspicious activity, apart from the fish going missing from the icebox the previous day, he said, turning around to all of us, who were gathered around the detective like a flock of geese, hanging on to his every word. Blaine stepped forward and said, "Sheriff, I did actually see something, but I'm not exactly sure what it was. It might, of course, be nothing. I feel kind of silly talking about it in case it was nothing." "Well, let me decide about that," said Sheriff. "What did you see, young lady? Anything you can tell us will be exceedingly helpful. Sometimes, believe it or not, it's the littlest things that can actually lead to an arrest." "Well, when we were taking our boat ride on the lake yesterday afternoon, after we'd been fishing, that is, I saw a figure through the trees watching us. I knew someone was there, but it was far too far away to get a good look at this person. I got the impression they could be quite large, although I'm not sure. It was so bright, the sun was really gleaming down on us, and so everything was obscure and rather indefinite. But I felt that this man was watching us. I didn't want to tell anyone about it, because I wasn't sure if I was seeing right." Mrs. Cooper then pounced on Blaine like a vulture on a dead carcass. "And you thought not to tell anyone about this, Blaine? How could you keep this to yourself? If you had mentioned any of this, if you had bothered to mention any of this, I would have called the sheriff forthwith, and the sheriff would have checked out the entire area for us to ensure we were safe. But no, you decided to keep your mouth shut, and now Claudia's been abducted. I hope you're proud of yourself, Blaine." Blaine began to quiver nervously. "I'm really sorry, Mrs. Cooper. I really thought it might have been my imagination playing tricks on me. It happened so quickly, you see. It's easy to start doubting yourself. But the more I think about it, I'm pretty sure someone was there.
Maybe they've been watching us all this time, waiting for an opportunity to abduct one of us. Maybe while we were on the boats, the man quickly raided the icebox at our campsite and stole the fish, as no one would have been around then, and he wouldn't have been seen, would he? I'm very sorry, Mrs. Cooper. You're right. I should have said something.
This could have been avoided, Blaine, if you'd spoken out about this matter to me, or Miss Greenwich for that matter. What is wrong with all you girls? Why don't you learn to communicate better? Tutted Mrs. Cooper. Look, Mrs. Cooper, interjected Miss Greenwich, the sheriff is absolutely right. No one is to blame for any of this, so let's quit pointing fingers at each other, shall we? This accusational attitude is not going to get us anywhere very fast. We need to team together to try and find Claudia, and taking jibes at each other is helping no one. Instead, it's just causing great upset and disquiet. Very well put, Miss Greenwich. I couldn't have put it better myself, said the sheriff, looking at Miss Greenwich appreciatively, seemingly glad that one of the elders among us was being governed by some common sense. The sheriff asked us all a plethora of questions, and a search was undertaken to look for the whereabouts of Claudia Salazar at first light. Without doubt, it was a frantic time for the all of us, and everyone was overwrought with anxiety, realizing that Claudia had been abducted. Miss Greenwich remained stoic. She fussed over us like a devoted mother hen, reassuring us that none of this was our fault. But all of us felt in some way responsible for Claudia's abduction. For the remaining members of the fearsome four, without doubt our biggest regret was that we had gone to swim at the lake in the middle of the night. I think Natalie was the one that carried around the most guilt, for she knew she was the one that had dragged us out of our sleeping bags to go swimming in the lake against our will. I reassured her that at the end of the day that we'd all agreed to go swimming. So this was not her fault, and she shouldn't be blaming herself. I also told her that it was blindingly obvious to me that this Ottoman-like creature had clearly had designs on abducting one of us, and Claudia just got unlucky. I do believe this Ottoman stole all the fish from the icebox deliberately, so it rather boldly ventured into our campsite without even being seen. But I'm sure this creature was perfectly capable of catching his own fish. My guess is he liked playing games with us. I think he was a bit of a trickster. Several weeks after Claudia's abduction, when no sign of her was found, the sheriff determined she was probably deceased, and had fallen victim to foul play, to the man on the loose they were looking for. Little did he know that Claudia's abductor was not exactly human, but nobody was about to divulge that kind of information to him. There had been a very special memorial service for Claudia Salazar, which we had all attended, and her poor Aunt Eva was inconsolable with grief, not knowing what had become of her niece, but accepting the fact that Claudia was probably dead. I felt desperately sorry for the woman, but I am sure my words of comfort must have fallen on deaf ears. One evening before lights out, several weeks after Claudia Salazar's abduction, Miss Greenwich came into our dormitory. "I've got some rather bizarre news for all of you," she told the remaining members of the fearsome four, where in our small dormitory there remained one bed that was unoccupied and empty, the bed that belonged to Claudia Salazar, of course. "What do you mean bizarre?" asked Natalie curiously, her eyes fixed steadily on Miss Greenwich. "Well," said Miss Greenwich, pulling out a tissue from her pocket and dabbing her forehead, "the very good news is the sheriff informs me that at long last they've arrested that despicable man that sexually assaulted that poor young woman in the Ozarks that was found lying dying on that footpath. Remember the story?" "Wow, that's incredible," I said. "That poor young woman must be so happy that he's finally been brought to account for what he did. How did they find him?" "It would seem a local reported him living rough in the woods close to a farmhouse in the Ozarks, not very far from the White Oak Sanctuary, would you believe? This local man claimed that this vagrant was living out rough and had broken into the family kitchen to steal food from the refrigerator on half a dozen occasions. Anyway, this local notified the police at once, especially after he discovered the man had pitched a tent in his woods. He also discovered some of his family possessions, like pots and blankets, that the family were missing, were lying strewn around the campsite. The police found the man and brought him in for questioning. He admitted to sexually assaulting the girl that was found half dead on a footpath. But the story gets weirder still.
It does?
Well, he's only gone and confessed to killing Claudia Salazar and burying her body near the lake at the Oakwood Sanctuary. But he says he can't remember very conveniently where exactly he buried her. So it's obvious he's lying through his teeth. But the sheriff believes him 100% and told him to his face that he was the scum of the earth and the lowest form of pond life.
But he didn't do it, I protested. Why would he take the blame for something he didn't do? And how do you know he actually sexually assaulted this poor woman?
Well, it's because she identified him straight away from a lineup, I believe. So it definitely was him.
So if it's him, I'm very glad then he's been arrested and charged, I said. But why would he admit to Claudia Salazar's abduction when he had nothing to do with it whatsoever? We all know that.
Well, people are strange, are they not? Said Miss Greenwich reflectively. I don't think the sheriff pressurized him into a confession, if that's what you're thinking. On the contrary, it seemed that this rather unhinged perpetrator appeared to be gloating about what he claimed to have done to the poor woman he sexually assaulted. He went into great detail about the assault. He kept asking the sheriff if he would be in the newspaper. He seemed to really like the thought of gaining some kind of notoriety for what he'd done. So I guess he decided to make out that he'd killed Claudia Salazar, as it would add a few more notches to his bedpost, I suppose. Apparently he loved John Wayne Gacy, saw him as some kind of hero.
That's seriously sick, I said. Who in their right mind confesses to something they didn't do?
Someone who clearly isn't in their right mind, Philippa. The man is obviously delusional and very opinionated. The good news is that the case in regards to Claudia Salazar is closed, and no one will be asking any more questions about what really happened to her, which is great news for us, as this man has taken responsibility for her abduction and murder. So we can move on with our lives and put this all behind us. No one can ever know what really happened to Claudia. It'll be our secret, and at the very least, the man confessing to have killed Claudia will give her Aunt Eva some much-needed closure. I think if her Aunt Eva knew what really had happened to her niece, she'd never get a wink of sleep ever again. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss, you know.
Do you really think we did the right thing, Miss Greenwich, suppressing the truth about what really happened to Claudia?
Oh, I'm in no doubt about that. We definitely did the right thing, said Miss Greenwich. Imagine if we told the sheriff an otter man had abducted Claudia. I don't think he'd have believed a word of it. When people think you're making up stories, they start to smell a rat, don't they? The next thing you know, they start to sniff around you, thinking you've got something to hide. And that can lead you down some tumultuous paths, let me tell you. People have sometimes been falsely accused of things they never did, based on giving the police a bizarre story that didn't seem to ring true. I did not want under any circumstances the sheriff to be thinking that about anybody on our camping trip. Sometimes the very best way to protect oneself is to say as little as you possibly can, which is what we did, and in my mind we were sagaciously wise in that regard. Why do you think, Philippa, when a lawyer stands in for you during questioning with the police, he always tells his client to say no comment? The more you say no comment, the greater chance you have of not implicating yourself. Look, I've got something to show you girls, said Miss Greenwich. It's an article written in the 1940s, would you believe, that I had photocopied from the local library. I've been doing my research, and my efforts have paid off exponentially. Miss Greenwich pulled out a piece of paper from her pocket, in the long cardigan she was wearing over her flowery dress. With trembling fingers she read us the article. She was seated on the bed, and we'd gathered around her like chicklets around a mother hen. She looked up from the paper at us with a peppering of excitement dappling her blue eyes. Let me tell you this, girls. This article quite literally took my breath away. I'm so incredibly glad I found it. I think it describes what you saw, Philippa, when Claudia was abducted by this ghastly ottoman. I understand it's known as a kushtaka. So you were right, Philippa, when you said that this thing that snatched Claudia looked to be a cross between an otter and a man. Kushtaka means just that, ottoman.
Miss Greenwich went on to read the article to us out loud, and we hung on to her every word, our eyes widening every second with intrigue.
Mr. Rob Menendez of Anchorage, Alaska, was out fishing at the Kenai River in a sequestered location with his brother Frank on a very quiet, unassuming day when the weather was glorious, as summer in Alaska so invariably always is. Even though I live in Alaska, he admitted to us. I don't get out much until the weekends, he told the paper. Fishing is my favourite thing to do. It relaxes me, irons away some of the stress, so to speak. Me and my brother Frank were staying at our rather unremarkable cabin, which is situated on the Kenai River. We regularly frequent it when we go fishing. It's a humble little place, about as basic and rudimentary as you can get, to put it mildly. But it serves our most basic needs, and we thoroughly enjoy coming here for fishing weekends. I rather suspect the wives are happy to get rid of us for a while, and we are equally as delighted to be spending some quality time to ourselves in the great outdoors. On the day in question, which I believe was a Sunday morning, we began fishing, but both became incredibly twitchy and ill at ease. It's hard to describe, but something didn't feel right. I couldn't for the life of me figure out why I felt so discomposed, so disquieted. At one point on the far corner of the lake, my brother was absolutely sure he'd seen a pair of yellow eyes staring up at him from the water, like a crocodile. But he assured me that this was no crocodile. He asked me if I'd seen it, and I told him no, I hadn't. He claimed this thing had been watching us. That was when we heard something very, very big rushing past us in the water. This thing was huge, monstrously large, as its shadow swam right past us at a great, great speed. Unfortunately, I couldn't see it too clearly. The water was a little murky that morning, but certainly this thing left a lot of ripples in the water, which suggested to me it must have been quite substantial in size. Once that thing with the yellow eyes had gone, we felt significantly better, a whole lot more relaxed, and the day went by lackadaisically. As things calmed down, we talked and laughed as you do and enjoyed the day casually drinking a plethora of beers. All of a sudden, the uneasiness that we'd experienced earlier on in the afternoon came upon us again. We both felt very definitely that something was watching us. My brother checked the water for the yellow eyes he claimed to have seen earlier, but nothing was there. We assured ourselves we were being silly, a little overwrought perhaps. Me and my brother run a business, and we reminded ourselves about the plethora of orders we had to sort out at our workshop in Anchorage. So we assured ourselves that all the pressure was mounting up on us, and we were becoming unduly nervous about whether we would be able to meet our customers' demands or not. It's amazing how one always looks for a rational explanation to explain a sense of disquiet that you might suddenly feel. I had drunk so many beers that afternoon, but I want to stress I am no drunk, and I was not inebriated. I can hold my own when it comes to alcohol. That was when we saw the creature, and I'm telling you, he absolutely wanted us to see him. Of that I am in no doubt. I got that sense straight away, as if this creature was enjoying toying with us, as if it was all just a fun game for him. You would think that me and my brother would scream, run straight back to the cabin, bolt ourselves inside, but we did none of that. I have thought about our reaction to this creature long and hard. Let's just say I personally believe the fear response didn't kick in for the both of us, as we simply could not believe what our eyes were seeing. Indeed, so astonished and befuddled were we, that we just stood there frozen to the spot, gawking at this thing, and saying nothing. The only noise I heard was the drum roll of my rapidly beating heart. The creature, of the likes of such I have never ever seen before, was about 8 foot tall, robustly strong with powerful shoulders and legs. It looked to be a combination of man and otter, but giant in size and extremely formidable. It was covered in densely packed brown hair, like an otter, and had a large tail that it was flicking around all the time. I remember thinking to myself, what the hell? Is this thing even real? I'll never forget as long as I live those yellow eyes that stared at us from across the riverbank. And I'm telling you, this thing, whatever it may have been, was laughing at us. I know that sounds far-fetched, but it absolutely is true. I think he was loving the shock factor of our gog-eyed reaction to him. I knew this must be the creature with the yellow eyes that had been staring at my brother from under the water like a crocodile, which was very disconcerting to say the very least. But what happened next is completely nonsensical and outlandish. I assure you it is true, as my brother can surely testify. The creature standing across the riverbank shifted into my brother, and my brother was standing right next to me. He nearly passed out from shock to see himself standing on the opposite side of the bank, staring back at himself, when he knew the man staring back at him, who was a carbon copy of himself, was not him. The next thing I know is the creature shape-shifted from my brother into me, and then finally it turned back into itself again, let out what I can only say was a loud mocking laugh, dived under the water and swam away, leaving a huge pile of ripples behind him in his wake. For a moment me and my brother stood perfectly still, and then he turned around to me and asked, "Did you just see what I thought I saw?" Let's just say me and my brother got the hell away from that cabin as fast as we could. I wondered after I thought about this, whether the idea for the creature was to scare us away from the river, so he could have the place to himself, or was he just thoroughly enjoying causing us a great deal of distress, as if it was just a big gain to him? I sneakily suspect the latter to be the case. Ostensibly, it is safe to say, after such an unorthodox, paradoxical experience, I won't be in a hurry to go back to the cabin for quite a while. I know in Alaska people have seen strange things here, but after that experience at the riverbank, I do understand that other people have had similar experiences with shape-shifting creatures that seem to be able to take on human form. I cannot even imagine what this thing was. Needless to say, when me and my brother Frank returned home to our respective wives to tell them what we'd seen, they didn't believe a word of it. I can't say I was surprised by that. I was met with rolling eyes, exasperated sighs, and scathing comments where I was told I didn't see what I'd seen and I was being absolutely ridiculous. It was frustrating, let me say, that my wife didn't believe me, as my brother's wife did not believe him. My wife thinks we were so drunk with the beers we were consuming that we were hallucinating, and in the process convinced each other we had seen something which only existed in our imaginations. I told my wife maybe she was right, to get her off my back. I couldn't stand all her nagging. Let's just say, me and my brother know exactly what we saw, and hand on heart, we were not hallucinating. When Miss Greenwich finished reading us the article, she looked up at us and said, "So there you go, Philippa. You're not alone. Other people have had similar experiences to yours. There is no doubt this critter, whatever it is a trickster. I think sometimes he likes to tease and provoke in order to get a reaction, and other times he cunningly lures in his prey with the purpose of eating them. And I hate to say this to you girls, I think that is exactly what happened to Claudia Salazar." We were all sombre for a moment, but we nodded our heads in agreement, sharing in the sadness of this moment. 15 years later, Boston, Massachusetts. It was an ordinary day like any other day, in the green leafy neighborhood in North End in Boston where I lived. I was 33 years old at the time, a happily married woman with a 2-year-old boy called Kennedy. My mother had been absolutely right about my friendships with the remainder of the fearsome four, for we had failed to keep in touch over the last 15 years or so, since we had parted company. While I missed my old friends, the distraction of my daily life had meant I was living in the moment, rather than reflecting soulfully on the past. I had learnt via the grapevine that sadly Miss Greenwich had died 5 years ago from breast cancer, and I would have gone to the funeral most certainly, had I been informed about her passing. That had saddened me greatly, to think of such a remarkable woman.
I also knew that the body of our friend Claudia Salasai had never been found, and probably never would be. When I thought about what had happened to her, it had made me grievously sad, but I tried desperately not to think about her too much. It was on a WhatsApp post that I received on that Monday morning that I was taken by surprise. The WhatsApp was from my old friend Natalie, who suggested that the 3 remaining members of the Fearsome Four got together for a reunion after 15 years. It was such a shock to hear from her after so long. I had to gather my thoughts, sit down, and read her text over and over again, my eyes misting over with nostalgia. "Hi there, Philippa, and hi there, Laura. It's me, Natalie. Long time no see. It's been far too long. 15 years to be exact, would you believe? Doesn't time fly? It seems like only the other day we were 18. Now we're all in our early 30s. Not so young anymore, are we? I'm dreading the big 40 that is creeping around the very next corner. And to think I used to think if you were 40 you were over the hill and heading for the knacker's yard. That will one day soon be the 3 of us. I've been thinking about what happened at the lake at the White Oak Sanctuary all those years ago. Well, I doubt it's something any of us will ever forget about. It's left an indelible imprint in our lives. I thought it would be nice for us to get together and reconnect. It's been far too long. I thought if I didn't make an effort to get in touch, that I'd never see you guys again. I've missed you both so terribly much, and I hate myself for my apathy. Just so you know, I got in touch with the owner of the White Oak Sanctuary, a delightful man called Philip Donovan. He was terribly friendly towards me. He's given us permission to go camping at the sanctuary free of charge for a weekend away in the Ozarks. He remembered what happened at the lake all those years ago, and how Claudia Salasai was abducted. He was saying how glad he was the criminal in question had been locked away. I didn't say anything in regards to that matter. I've accepted his generous offer to go and camp by the lake. If you can possibly join me, it will be so wonderful to reconnect again. It really would be. I just want Claudia to know that she has never been forgotten. We can bring some flowers to scatter over the lake in remembrance of her, and we can take a boat ride out on the water and even do a spot of fishing. We could also throw some flowers on the water to remember Miss Greenwich by, who I believe died 5 years ago from breast cancer. So very sad. I can only apologize for not being in touch a whole lot sooner. I, for one, would love to reconnect. It's been such a dreadfully long age. Please say yes. Please say you'll come. Look forward to hearing from you. All my love, Natalie. When I received the WhatsApp post from Natalie, the events of the day when Claudia was abducted came rushing straight back to me, and the recall was not at all pleasant, as I remember that creature changing from Mrs. Cooper into its original form, with its masterful shape-shifting techniques, and its uncanny ability to know things about people and to imitate their exact voices. Where a skill like that comes from, I simply cannot fathom. I've thought about this long and hard, ever since, and cannot logically come up with any answers. Maybe the Kushtaka has psychic abilities that enable it to see into people's lives, of which it may choose to emulate. Thinking about this dreadfully sly and cunning creature sent chills down my spine. I was very glad Miss Greenwich had protected us all those years ago, when the police were asking us questions about Claudia's abduction. My husband believes that she was a wise woman, as such an outlandish story about Claudia being snatched away by such a bizarre, cryptic creature, which may have possessed Bigfoot-like characteristics, might have drawn great suspicion and unwanted attention to the fearsome four. People might think we have accidentally harmed our friend, buried her, and pretended some weird creature had whisked her away. My husband encouraged me to accept the invite for the camping weekend. "You must go," he told me. "These are old friends of yours that go back a long time. I think it would be great to reconnect. Go to the sanctuary again, enjoy yourself, have a fabulous time. It's very sad you lost Claudia all those years ago, but it's important to talk about her and remember her with fondness. You need not worry about Kennedy. My mother will be more than happy to take care of her grandchild. You know how much she idolizes our little boy." "Well, I suppose you're right. I should go," I said, feeling somewhat reluctant about leaving behind my 2-year-old boy. But I was excited to see my friends again, and a reunion was long overdue. I was shocked how much everyone had changed, myself included, I suppose. I was no longer as skinny as I used to be, although Laura, with her Scandinavian good looks, remained as slim as she'd always been. So I'm in no doubt she'd still be able to fit in her old school uniform. Let's just say me and Natalie, well, we would have filled out a little. And I had got a little plump over the years. We also had a few lines on the face. But beyond that, I don't think we were much different. We still had much in common, which was a huge relief. By all accounts, spending time with my good friends reminded me of the good old days. We were all married now, and Natalie and Laura both had 3-year-old boys. I had a 2-year-old. And we were living in completely different states. The 3 of us were all stay-at-home mums, who had put working aside to take care of our kids. It was rather strange to go back to the old haunting ground in the Ozarks, which was as spectacular as ever. It was nostalgic being back by the lake again. Everything seemed exponentially bigger, trees were so much taller, and the lake was as magnificent as I remembered it to be. The memories of our time spent here in this idyllic, prepossessing part of the world brought tears to my eyes. But the best feeling of all was being back together with my old friends. It really was like the good old days. And let's just say there was lots of hugs, tears, and much reminiscing, as you would have expected. "What are we all like?" said Natalie. "We swore blind we'd keep in touch, didn't we, when we went our separate ways? But we failed to keep our promises. What the hell is wrong with us? You know what they say about old friendships. They're the most enduring of them all. I'm mad at myself for being so lax at remaining in touch with you both, most especially after what happened to poor Claudia. We've had a deep bond between us, and what happened to Claudia brought us closer together, for we are the only living people that know what happened to her. I still think about her an awful lot, you know, but I've reconciled myself to the fact that things happen in life. I used to have dreadful nightmares all the time about her." "You did?" I asked. "Absolutely. I blamed myself for her abduction. Remember, I was the one that insisted on taking that midnight swim. If I hadn't dragged you out of your beds, then none of this would have happened. Well, your sleeping bags, actually, but it's the same thing, isn't it?" "I don't think that's true," I said. "If it wasn't Claudia that was abducted, I'm 100% positive someone else on our trip would have been. I'm sure of it. The Kushtaka stole our fish from the icebox to make a statement. I don't think it had anything to do with it being hungry. It was all a game to it." "Well, it may have been lazy, or just an opportunist," suggested Laura. "No, he wasn't an opportunist. He was toying with us. Remember when Miss Grenridge read us that article from the 1940s about 2 brothers that went fishing and had an encounter with the Kushtaka? They emphatically believe he was a trickster that enjoyed toying with them. Well, that's true," Laura agreed. "We may never know the answer to all the questions we have." We spent a beautiful weekend together, and on a very pleasant boat ride across the water of the lake, we threw flowers into the lake to remember both Claudia Salasai and Miss Grenridge by, with so much love. We spent the rest of the evening sitting by the crackling fire, making s'mores and telling each other ghost stories. But they were made up from our imaginations, and failed to compare with the ghost story that Blaine had shared with us on that magical evening 15 years earlier. The following morning I surprised myself by being the first to get up. As I was up and about, I decided to take a casual stroll around the lake. I was rather surprised to see that Natalie was out on the lake rowing a boat. She was waving at me vigorously. I returned the wave and thought to myself, Natalie is still an early bird, but she had the right idea taking a boat out on the lake. I should have thought of that myself. Maybe we could have gone together. I returned back to camp and read a book for a while I waited for Laura to get up and for Natalie to return from the lake. I couldn't understand why Natalie was taking so long, and why Laura was still fast asleep in her sleeping bag. I decided it would be rude to wake Laura up. She was probably too tired after all the excitement of being reunited again after so long. Imagine my surprise when both Natalie and Laura emerged from inside the tent. They both had tousled hair that was flat on one side, were yawning and wiping away the sleep that had gathered in their eyes. They looked at me in surprise, because I was up and about already. "How long have you been up, Philippa?" asked Natalie in surprise. "You even got the fire pit started. You're an absolute gem." It's no big deal, I said. I've been up for quite a while. I went for a casual stroll around the lake. It was really lovely. My word, you're energetic, said Laura, sounding impressed. These days with the 3-year-old, I grab any opportunity I can to have a sleep in. Me too, Natalie admitted. In the good old days, I could survive on 4 hours sleep. Not any more. With a rambunctious 3-year-old, I'm pretty much drained of all my energy. It seems we're all in the same boat, with kids, I mean. When Natalie said the word boat, I suddenly remembered I'd seen her rowing on the water of the lake. She'd been waving at me. Well, don't hide your light under a bushel, Natalie, I teased. You were also up and about early this morning. I saw you myself. I was impressed to see how very energetic you were. You were waving at me. I was thinking I should have also gone rowing instead of walking. If I'd known you were up and about, we could have gone for a boat ride together. I would have enjoyed rowing with you. What are you talking about? Asked Natalie. I never went rowing on the lake, nor did I wave at you. We all stared at each other in abject confoundment, and at the very same time we all uttered the word kushtaka. Let's just say on realizing that the kushtaka was obviously out and about still, playing the same old games, we seized our camping gear and spent the rest of the weekend at a lovely lodge. And these days me and my friends still remain in touch. But I am convinced the same creature that abducted Claudia 15 years ago was toying with me that morning on the lake when he pretended to be Natalie. But this time the fearsome four were not going to be taken in by him. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.